Hello, hello. Finally, the
Hello.
day's here. How are you, Anna?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm very well, and I'm not sure if you're
Good.
as pumped as I am, but I'm truly excited for this webinar tonight. There's been a lot of lead up to this. We've been talking about 10 days to go, 7 days to go, 3 days to go. Then I checked earlier today and it was like 3 hours to go. And I was like, yeah, I'm really excited. Let's get ready to go. And now we're right here live in the studio from Sydney and, broadcasting this across several platforms and across the world is just an exciting moment to be here. How do you feel
Yes,
about
yes.
today's webinar happening?
Oh, like I'm so excited. I'm so excited to learn from all the speakers that we have. So we have some really great speakers coming on that are going to share some really insightful topics. I can't wait to learn. I'm excited for the audience too to hear what they have to say, what they have to think, answer some questions. It's gonna be really great. Yeah.
Absolutely. And for all our audience, if you've attended any of these sort of webinars that have been hosted by the Legacy Consult, by Dr. Nee, you know you're in for good value. You know what you glean out of this is going to be coming at you with a lot of evidence-based approaches, a lot of facts, a lot of figures, and a lot of applications of some of these principles that we're going to be talking about tonight. But for our audience, we'd like to know where joining us from. We're in Sydney, and we've just transitioning from winter into a different season right now. But we'd like to know where you're joining in from. If you're in from the United States, we'd like to know you. We'd like to say hello to you. For audiences across Africa, from Nigeria, Ghana, wherever you are from, we'd like you to put it in the chat and just let us know where you're joining us from. And yeah, just to hear from you and just to feel your level of excitement as well, because we are quite excited because we know that we are in for great value tonight. And depending on where you're joining us from, it might be morning, it might be afternoon, but we are in the evening time and we are absolutely excited and raring to go. We've got a comment from someone. I'm sure I'm going to get to read that in a minute. Yeah, we see comments coming in from Canada, Janet Olayemi, Abiola Ojebola from Nigeria, Bimbo from Nigeria, Oluwatobi from Belgium. Thank you for joining us. We welcome you.
We have a Janet from Canada, which is cool. I'm actually originally from Canada. I moved here about 2 years ago. I'm based in Sydney now, but I'm from Nova Scotia, Canada. I see Janet's from Saskatchewan, so that's really interesting. We have people from all over the world. We have Zara from Auckland.
Amazing.
Nice to see you. Wonderful.
And we've got Joy joining in from England. That is amazing. Cecilia from New Zealand as well. And that's the interesting thing. We've got a Berry from Abuja, Nigeria, from across the world. And it's interesting because we're talking about the diversity and just looking at the diverse backgrounds and the diverse location of people joining in, that is already sort of speaking to the theme that we are looking at tonight. We've got Amos from Sydney, Olumide from Nigeria, Abere from Abuja, Cecilia from New Zealand, Ifeoluwa from Perth. Coincidentally, I work out of Western Australia and I absolutely love that place. It is beautiful, it is serene, it is quiet. So we are kindred spirits, Ifeoluwa. That is an absolutely beautiful place. We've got the MMK show, Lily from Australia, pretty much from all over the world. Amazing stuff. Amazing.
Yeah, we've
Amazing.
covered a lot of continents already. That's wonderful to see.
I tell you, it is amazing. But just coming back to you, Anna, what sort of expectations, and we're going to be coming to our audience as well to ask you the same, to know what your expectations are about this webinar. Because one thing I've learned personally is that coming into webinars like these, for me, I keep an open mind, but at the same time, I've got a set level of expectations because I know that I'll be coming across people of value, people that know their stuff, people that have applied the principles that they're going to be talking about. So I'm always ready with my notepad. I'm going to show it to you ready to
Yeah.
take notes, ready to learn, and ready to dive deep and learn from every opportunity. So, how about you, Anna? What's your expectation tonight?
Oh, I'm really expecting to learn some new stuff as well. I've also got my notebook here and a couple different pens and highlighters. Yeah, I'm just really anticipating hearing a little bit more on neurodiversity and specifically hearing like how we can help those who maybe are neurodiverse in our communities and in our social surroundings. I think it'll be really beneficial to, just have some more knowledge on that, and awareness, I think, is of real value, especially in today's day and age. So how
That
about
is
yourself? What are you
absolutely
looking forward
true.
to? What are your expectations?
Those are really, really valid expectations, Anna. But I just wanted to quickly acknowledge Ifunaya from Nigeria, Makinde watching from Ilorin, Kwara State, Janet Oyelami. She's looking forward to learning about children with special needs and also to learn how to support them. I might have shared this with a few people, but I've got three teenagers. And one of the things I have learned to do personally is to be very adaptable because I noticed the diversity amongst my three children. So I noticed that my approach to one might not necessarily work with the other, might not, so I vary my approach and I tell people that care to listen that it's sort of doing like a tango with each of them. In some cases, I take the lead. In some cases, I allow the other person to take the lead because I've noticed that sort of difference in their perception, in their the abilities, in their attitudes and stuff like that. So I vary myself and I apply myself depending on what the situation needs. And what I've learned is that we are all diverse. So there's a diversity of thoughts. There's a diversity of opinions. There's a diversity of backgrounds. There's a diversity of expectations. And what I've realized is that we can learn a lot about other people by attending webinars like this. And when we attend webinars like this, we can glean a lot of value out of it that we can then take onto our jobs, take into our community, take into our families with a better understanding of how to approach relationships, how to, build bridges, how to build a better bond. And a lot of times, surprise, surprise, we learn a lot about ourselves as well. So we then know the reason we behave the way we behave. We know the reason things are, some things are just pet peeves to us and stuff like that. So my expectation coming into this is first to gain a better awareness about myself, because then I know my strengths, I know my skills, I know how to apply myself better. And I become a better father, I become a better husband, a better workplace, a better neighbor, by understanding, where people are from as well.
Yeah, wonderful. What a wonderful mindset too to enter into topics and discussions like this, which an open mind. It's really gonna allow us to grow and to learn. And so I'd encourage everyone listening, and myself included, like to come in with an open mind and let's learn and let's try to understand that diversity and how we can apply it into our lives as well. It's going to be of great value.
Absolutely. And we've got a few more comments here. I'll just quickly go through that. Oh yeah, we've got someone having issues with their device. Yeah, that might be from your end because I think yeah, that's Uche. You just want to check your audio connection and fix that because I think everyone else can hear us. And we've got Makinde Omololu commenting here that they are looking forward to how to learn, how to understand and communicate adequately with kids with neurodivergent mind and how to teach them and understand and how they learn. These are my expectations. That is absolutely wonderful. Absolutely wonderful. And yeah, Anna, do you want to touch a bit about, the array of professionals we've got tonight and what people can expect? I mean, we're not letting the cat out of bag yet and reading their bios or anything, but just a sneak peek. Like when you just lift the cover a bit and just tell them, oh, there's a color green under here, there's a color yellow coming at you. Just want to give us like a sneak peek of that?
Yes, yes, thank you. We have 4 doctors that will be coming on and sharing different topics with us this evening. We've got Dr. Nee, we have Dr. Melissa, Dr. Renner, and Dr. Oya Khan. Really looking forward to hearing what they have to say. We're gonna have about 20-minute sessions to hear from them in different topics on neurodiversity, neurobiology, common myths, evidence-based interventions, things like that, dealing with with the early recognition and with teenager diagnosis and things like that. So it should be really great.
Awesome, awesome, awesome. That is amazing. And I don't know if you kept count there. Those are 4 doctors. So what I hear is there's a lot of brain power in the house. And if you are like me, you've got your notepads, you've got your pens ready, you've got your recording devices ready to capture as much value out of this. And like Anna said, there'll be strategies for parents. So if you're a parent and you've got like a neurodivergent child that you're training and you're trying to understand them better, you're going to get strategies on how to relate with them. We're going to be looking at ADHD in teenagers and young adults. And like I said, even me as an adult, because I've heard it said in a few circles that I've got OCD and it's a bit too much and all of that stuff. So I want to learn about myself too, not just young adults. You can see a bit of gray in my beard and stuff like that. So I'm not so young, but I like to think of myself as being young as well. So those are the things we'll be looking at, early recognition and diagnosis and all of the ADHD issues that you might come across in teenagers, in young adults. And I dare say in adults as well, we can still learn and apply ourselves and improve. And you're going to get an opportunity to ask questions. That's like a blank check to you. With the amount of brain power we've got on the panel tonight, that is an open check. That is an open check. So without much ado, we're going to be bringing on the first speaker. Anna, you're going to do us the honors. Dr. Nee is coming on. If you want to read through his bio and drum roll, bring him on.
Yes, wonderful. So I'd like to introduce Dr. Nee. I've had the pleasure of hearing him speak in the past, and he's an excellent speaker. Dr. Nee is an award-winning neurologist, neuroscience researcher, neuro-leadership expert, and executive coach with a mission to empower leaders to drive personal, professional, and organizational change. Dr. Nee is dedicated to raising leaders who are not just reactive to change, but create change without losing their identity and purpose. As the director of Legacy Consults, Dr. Nee leads a leadership development platform that equips leaders to enhance their performance and inspire their teams. This initiative leverages evidence-based, bespoke neuroscience solutions to boost productivity and profitability in organizations. Dr. Nee holds certifications in neuroscience from business from MIT in Boston, USA, and neuroscience of leadership from Enhance Perform in Australia. He is also a John Maxwell Team certified trainer and facilitator. In addition to his professional roles, Dr. Nee is the founder and host of Brian Mind and Change, BMC, an online series that merges his scientific expertise and leadership focus to teach individuals how to master their brains, rewire their minds, and effect change in their lives. He is a thoughtful leader and co-host of Transformative Leadership Curriculum, an annual conference held in various cities that aims to raise leaders up for transformative impact. An Amazon best-selling author, Dr. Nee has written 4 books, including his autobiography, Navigating Change, The Timeless Secrets of Growth in an Ever-Changing World. He also serves as a senior officer in the Specialist Medical Reserve for the Royal Australian Air Force. So please welcome Dr. Nee.
Wow, amazing. Well, that was a great introduction. Thank you, Anna and Mr. Biola for, being amazing compared. So it's such a great honor and a privilege to be here, and I'm glad that I'm here. So thank you guys. Thank you guys. Wow, welcome to this webinar, the Neurodiversity webinar. I'm so excited to be here, and I'm glad that you've connected. So please do me a favor. You're allowed to share this link with everyone. All right, put it on all your WhatsApp groups, your Facebook groups, share it with your with your friends and your family members and anyone that you know you're connected with in one way or the other. Share the best thing you can do for them right now is to share this link. Share this link with everyone. All right, because we're about to dive deep into some very amazing stuff, and we've got a great panel. We've got a great faculty tonight, and well, tonight because it's evening time in Sydney. I know we've got a very global audience, so wherever you are from, you're going to be in for a blast. So please share the link with others. Share it around. You're allowed to. This is not a paid program, so you're allowed to share it and invite others. All right. So thank you for all the people who have connected, and thank you so much for being here. So I value you all because we've got a very full program today. We're going to be going in straight to the point. Okay, straight to the point. We do not have too much time, but there's so much value that we have in store here today. So I will be talking about the neurobiology of some of the neurodiverse conditions that are quite common. And so my hope is to create a background and to give to lay the foundation so that the other speakers would be able to build on that foundation. So I'm not going to be going too deep because I just do not have the time to do so. Let me just get my brain model. Let me get my brain model. Got my brain here. So just in case I need it. All right. So I wouldn't be going too deep in this, but my intention is to explain some of the biological changes that occur in the brains of people that have some of the common neurodiverse conditions to lay a foundation so that we can understand this better and then the others can do justice to the different aspects. I hope you can hear me. If you can hear me, put it there in the chat loud and clear. Put it there loud and clear. I can hear you loud and clear. All right, put it there so that I can get that feedback. I'll be sure that you are all connecting with me. All right, good, good, good. Let's go on to the neurobiology of neurodiversity. All right. So what is my why? Why are we having this? What is the reason? All right, for this. All right. Well, a few months ago, I met a parent who had a conversation with me, and she was just talking to me about son who had ADHD. This was a young boy in his early teens who was struggling with school and was just newly diagnosed with ADHD. Yeah, thank you, everyone. I can see that loud and clear, loud and clear. Thank you, thank you. So I was just talking to this mom who was concerned about a teen. She had this young teenager, a boy, very intelligent boy, very good with math and science, but the boy was just struggling with other things in school. His school performance had dropped off. He was not doing well, and she described what seemed to me what seemed to be hyperfixation. So this young boy, as gifted as he was intellectually, had this problem with hyperfixation, meaning that whenever he gets exposed to a stimulus or a sensory experience that he enjoys, his brain is flooded with so much dopamine that he gets hung up to that thing, he gets attached to that thing, and he would not let go. And so this boy loves languages. And what the mom described to me was incredible, that in the space of less than a year, this boy learned how to speak 5 languages. All right. And in fact, by the time this is an Aussie kid in Sydney here who, is in junior high school and could speak 5 languages, at least can converse in basic terms. And most of this was self-taught. So of course the mom saw the special abilities there, she started taking him to language classes, blah, blah, blah. And then one weekend, he got stuck with maps and cities, and he decided to memorize all the major cities in the United States. How many states there are? 52 states. Imagine how many, Anna's here from Canada, and she's close enough to America to know how many cities there are in each state. And this boy could give you all the stats. So 11, 12-year-old boy who could just reproduce every single stat that exists about every city in the United States, not even in Australia. So she was so, worried about this, that how can a boy be so gifted and all that? But then in class, it was like school wasn't suited for him. He will struggle with everything else. If he is not interested in anything, he will just, give up. and it was performing very poorly in school, and it was almost dropping out. And of course, the parent was worried, and that sort of led me to this whole journey, because after I met with her and I saw her concern, I traveled around North America doing, on a speaking tour, and I met a lot of parents who had different experiences with different neurodivergent conditions. So I thought it would be nice for us to come together and have a program like this where we may not be able to provide all the answers, but provide some answers and provide some explanations if there are any, and give some context to some of us, to some of the conditions that we have here. And I'm sure a lot of you have questions. So yeah, we time for questions. In fact, the longest session tonight will be for Q&A. So please keep your questions coming. If you, as they come to you, you're allowed to put them up. We've got a team in the background that will be harvesting those questions. Okay. So that's the reason why we're here. We're here to provide as many answers as possible. We can't provide all answers. And I operate in this space of neuroscience. I know how difficult it is to provide answers. And I know a lot of people don't have answers to a lot of the conditions. And even we as neuroscientists and practitioners, we've got quite a number of doctors here, we don't have all the answers to the challenges that we have. All right, I'm just going to start with ASD, autism spectrum disorder, and just give a bit of background about the neurobiology of this condition and what happens in the brains of some of the kids who have autism. It's quite common in our society. And to be honest with you, I can't remember, I can't count how many parents have had one-on-one sessions with this year alone because of their concerns about their kids who have autism. Now, one of the things that unfortunately, I've just summarized my slides, and so that we can have time, because I only have like 20 minutes to do this. Now, just a quick overview of what the brain structure looks like. Okay, so this is just a model of the brain, and if you look at the different lobes of the brain, we've got just come closer here. So we've got the frontal lobe, and then we have what we call the parietal lobe. All right, and then we have the temporal lobe and the occipital lobe and the brain stem. Okay, that's looking at the brain in terms of the different structures or the different lobes of the brain. Okay, but sometimes we can look at the brain from in a different way. Where we have what we call the forebrain, we've got the hindbrain, and then the midbrain. But I will just stick to the frontal lobe, the parietal lobe, the temporal lobe, and the occipital lobe. So these are the main lobes of the brain that helps. Okay, so I'm going to talk a bit about some of the different lobes of the brain and what they do. But starting with the frontal lobe is that part of the brain that helps us with a lot of the executive functions that we have. So our identity, our sense of identity, our sense of individuality, they're all encoded in the frontal lobe. Our ability to make decisions, executive decisions. So what we call executive functions, our ability to decide what to do and connect with our world and make decisions and, execute judgment. And all of that is all encoded in the frontal lobe. Our ability to inhibit our bad behavior, regulate our emotions are all there as well. So this frontal lobe is so important. And the prefrontal cortex, what we call the PFC. And you hear me talk about the PFC as we go on, is very important. What we do know is that in the brains of autistic children, there's some problems with the connectivity of the prefrontal cortex. And because the connectivity of the prefrontal cortex, which is very important, as I will come down in some other slides to talk about the PFC, that the PFC is very important in regulating behavior. It's very important in helping with the sense of identity. It's also important in social interactions and social connection. So that part of the brain is, the connectivity is impaired. And I'm just making this very basic, okay? But it's just because of time. We will have time to sort of go deeper later. And that affects, the ability of these kids with autism to interact and maybe responsible for some of the challenges they have with social connections and the flexibility of behavior. So it's also important to know that the prefrontal cortex helps to modulate our emotions. So they help to modulate emotions, particularly negative emotions like anxiety, like fear, like like those main ones, anxiety and fear. So there's an inverse relationship between the frontal cortex and the amygdala, which I'll talk about later, which is a generator of emotions, particularly the negative emotions. So what we do know is that in children with ASD, there is some problems. The connectivity between the prefrontal cortex and the amygdala, that connectivity is not as it should be. So regulating emotions is certainly a challenge. Okay, and I just talked about the amygdala here. All right, so the amygdala, if you heard me talk about the brain or talk about, neuro leadership, you would have heard me talk about the limbic system. The amygdala is a tiny little structure, almost like a bean-shaped structure. I'm not sure I can project it properly here. It's an almond-shaped structure. It's a very small structure. It's part of the limbic system, but it's the strongest emotion generator of emotions, and it's often negatively biased towards negative emotions. It's one of the structures that underpins the typical fight, flight, and freeze responses that most of us would have had before. All right. What we do know is that the amygdala is certainly susceptible, highly susceptible to external experiences or external stimulus, and so we know that people who have autism have problems with the amygdala, the response of the amygdala to stimuli, to external stimuli. So they have difficulty recognizing and expressing emotions. And here you can see here a scan here is actually a PET scan of a normal child and of a child here who has a neurodivergent condition. And you can see here that the part of the temporal lobe, the anterior temporal lobe, where the amygdala is poorly developed in that kid. So we know that there are structural changes that actually underpin some of this. Now, this may be a very extreme case and may not be generalizable to all kids, and that's why there's a spectrum. There's a spectrum for this, and I'm sure Melissa will talk about this in detail much later. I'll move on in the interest of time. We also know that somatosensory cortex is affected. The somatosensory cortex, that's that blue strip here. All right, it's very important in helping us sense our world. So every sensation, every sensory experience you have is routed to this cortex, and this cortex helps us to understand what we feel. So the glasses I have on right now, I feel the weight of these glasses because of my somatosensory cortex. All right, my wristwatch. All right, the sensory nerves here pick up the pressure from the wristwatch and send it up to my brain, and my brain can make sense of tactile sensation, taste sensations, and all the other sensations. We do know, all right, that in children with autism that there are problems with somatosensory cortex as well, in the ability to appreciate sensations and the ability to process the sensations, and sometimes they can be hyperreactive to some of these things, or they may not be able to modulate it properly. All right. Now, the other thing I'll mention here quickly because of time are the reward centers. We know now that there are differences in the reward systems of the brains in children with autism when you compare that with neurotypical brains. All right. The reward circuits is very, very important in modulating behavior, informing behavior, in establishing new behaviors. Usually, when you carry out a behavior that is good, that is positive, all right, the reward centers are activated. Your brain gets flooded with dopamine because that's the main neurotransmitter in that circuit. Okay, in that circuit, the main neurotransmitter is dopamine, and we will come to ADHD. Dr. Akan will talk about ADHD and talk about the challenges of the inadequate production of dopamine or release of dopamine in those brains. But in autism, we know that there's a problem with the reward centers in the connectivity of the different aspects of the reward centers, so that you're not able to generate enough positive feedback to sustain behavior. And that's why sometimes you see kids who initially show less interest to social stimulation, and they have a tendency to not want to participate in social activities just because their reward systems cannot be sufficiently stimulated enough. Their reward systems are not sufficiently stimulated enough for them to get value and for them to prioritize that or tag that social experience as something very valuable. Okay, so the reward is very important. It has a strong motivational property that helps us determine the kind of behaviors we would have and how we would respond. All right, so the reward pathway is important because it's a group of brain structures that are connected to each other, and they are the underlying basis for motivation, for learning, for positive emotions. All right, and so when those reward systems are not properly calibrated, motivation, the drive to do stuff, is not there. And in the other sense, we talk about hyperfixation, where there's just too much reward. where sometimes people just get attached to something and they cannot turn off. And it also happens in children with autism spectrum disorder. So we do know now that there are functional changes in their brain connections, all right, within the reward system that makes it difficult for kids to either turn on or turn these things off. And of course, the the what it leads to is that it leads to problems with motivation, desire, craving, learning, and all of these other things. Okay, so I'm just giving an overview of the biological changes that occur in the brains of these children. We also know that there have been certain recent studies that have actually shown over connectivity in brains of children with ASD. And so these are studies that have, because the initial perception was that the parts of the brains of children with autism are not well connected, but we now know that connectivity is actually enhanced in certain parts of the brain, particularly in the parts of the brain that helps with visual processing. Okay, and that's in the temporal lobe. I talked about the occipital lobe, which is mainly for visual processing, and of course the temporal lobe as well, which is helpful for speech and for speech. It also helps with some spatial awareness, as the parietal lobe. But the temporal and the connection between temporal and the occipital lobes, very important for speech and for visual and what we call visual spatial processing. All right, we know that that connectivity is increased in children with ASD, and so visual stimulation can be so powerful for them at times, and they may just, and I'm sure those of you who have contacts with kids with autism or ASD may be able to sort of speak to this, will be interested in your experiences and all that in this situation. I won't spend too much time talking about ADHD. Dr. Akon will be talking about ADHD, but just some general things that I need to mention about ADHD is that we know now that there's an overall reduction in brain size and function in certain areas of the brain in people with ADHD. And some of these things, of course, it's also a spectrum. Some of these changes are not picked up, or they're not usually apparent early on. And the reality is that we're seeing now that there are more and more adults being diagnosed with ADHD because they were not picked up. I'm not going to spend too much time there because we have a whole session on that. We do know that the basal ganglia, which is a part of the brain that helps us with motivation, the basal ganglia also helps us with motor processing, and is also connected to our emotional circuits and reward circuits, are affected in people with ADHD. All right, so those are structural changes. Also, the part of the brain or the part of the basal ganglia called the ventral striatum is important in inhibiting hyperactivity and impulsivity, and that's connected to the PFC. So when our PFC helps us with goal-directed behavior. So if you decide to do something, for example, you've joined this webinar now, you made a decision to join this webinar because your PFC identified that as a goal. And once your frontal lobe identified that as a goal, that information is passed on to the rest of your brain. Yes, attend this webinar, do this now, keep away all distractions, okay? And that information is sent through the basal ganglia to the thalamus, to the other parts of the brain, to just tell your brain that, hey, it's time to focus on this webinar. The truth of the matter is that in passing that information down, you need the certain structures of the brain are very important. But we now know that the ventral striatum, which is a part of the basal ganglia, that helps to dampen excessive hyperactivity of the brain, is that part of the brain doesn't work properly in people with ADHD, and that can be potentially problematic. We also know that there could be reduced activation of the prefrontal cortex in people with ADHD. So I was just talking about the top-down attention, which is the goal-directed attention. So once you decide to do something and you're intentional about that, you decide to do something, you pick a goal, that determines where your attention will be directed with. Like I want to study for a test, for example. All right, we now know that there's down regulation of the PFC in people with ADHD, so they are not able to sustain attention. And inattention seems to be a bigger deal in that situation. Of course, inhibition of appropriate behavior as well, of inappropriate behavior. I've talked about that the PFC is a part of the brain that helps us inhibit bad behavior. That's why you notice, for example, that in the morning, you're more likely to be strong-willed about avoiding temptation. So, for example, if you're trying to lose weight and you want to avoid, chocolates, like I've just had this chocolate now. I just saw it in the fridge, a very nice one. Weather's original. My God, I actually shouldn't be taking this. I would never not have yielded to this temptation in the morning. But in the evening, when I'm tired and all that, that's when you go to the fridge. You're likely to take that because your PFC is tied, the frontal lobe is tied, and all that. So your ability to inhibit, you know, um, inappropriate or bad behavior dampens in that situation, and also to regulate emotions. I'm just going to move on. And finally, I'll quickly just touch base with specific learning disorder, or what we call dyslexia. That there are significant differences in the brain, and research has shown us now that in non-dyslexic people, areas of the brain that are involved with language show adaptation to hearing words. So that when you hear words by same speaker over and over again, there are changes there, there are adaptations there, so you can pick up those words. All right. But the research has shown that in people who have dyslexia or specific learning disorders, the ability for the neural adaptation that takes place in their brain, for them to be able to learn words and to understand the meaning of words and to incorporate the meaning of the words, become compromised. So most of these people struggle to, it's almost as if the brain has to relearn and relearn and relearn. So the ability to actually incorporate and build on knowledge of words is very difficult. And of course, there's a process of what we call plasticity of the brain. We've talked about this before in my former seminars of neuroplasticity, which is the ability of the brain to repair itself and to develop itself. That ability seems to be compromised, particularly in the temporal lobes of people who have dyslexia, so that they are unable to properly build on that. So I'll finish up with this. I know that I've just gone so fast and I've just gone at a very high level. My job today is just to establish some basic foundations to let you know that truly all of these conditions have underlying neurobiological changes that can explain them. Now, we cannot fully explain why these things happen. It's just the truth. Excuse me. I look after a lot of other conditions, degenerative conditions, genetic conditions that we cannot explain. We can't explain Parkinson's disease or, certain dementias and all that. I still had 2 weeks ago a patient with hereditary spastic paraparesis. She's got, spasticity and weakness in the legs down, a young woman. We can't explain why these things happen, but even if we can explain why, we now understand how these things are happening, and maybe we can provide comfort and strength to those of you who are, in the trenches looking after children with these conditions. And hopefully today you'll get some more evidence-based strategies that you can employ in the care of this one. So neurobiology is important because it will help us, develop support strategies and empower us with knowledge. Okay. So I hope that you've gotten value from my short session. You'll see me back at the end of the session to wrap this up. We're going to be having a Q&A, and I'll try to answer the questions that come our way as much as I can. So it's a great pleasure to have you here. I hope that it's been, you got some value, and I'll hand over back to Anna and to Abiola. Cheers, guys.
Thank you so very much, Dr. Nee. I mean, we're just about 20 minutes into this conversation, and I've got my notepads, overflowing already. And I've just had a quick look in the comment section. I see that people are already putting in questions there. We want to encourage you to keep those questions coming, because like Dr. Nee mentioned, at the end of this conversation, when we've got through our list of faculties, we're going to be taking in all these questions. And Anna, what do you think of that? How awesome was that session?
So great. It's so great to learn. It's really good foundation for, I think, the rest of what we're going to learn today. Just a general idea of ADHD, of autism spectrum disorder and dyslexia, really giving that foundational understanding of what's happening in their brains that's different from a typical brain was really valuable. I appreciated the photos of the amygdala and the difference between someone with autism spectrum disorder and a typical brain, and then how that translates into actually being a spectrum, because that developmental process can look different in each brain with someone with that disorder. So I really appreciate that visual understanding moving forward for the rest of this evening. Yeah.
I see you're paying very close attention because, that was just remarkable. And we acknowledge our listeners, our audience that have joined in from all over the world. We acknowledge you, Mr. Diade Damola. You commented that you've got a daughter living with autism, and I can assure you, you have come to the right webinar tonight because you can just see the introduction alone with the amount of knowledge that is available, evidence-based approach to some of the other conversations that we're going to be having tonight. And you can look forward to the conversation that's going to be led by Dr. Melissa. She'll be speaking specifically to areas that will be of interest to you. We've also got Dr. Oyeka coming on later as well that will speak to some of those things. And we acknowledge you, Uche Nzene. We acknowledge you all the way from South Africa, Bolanle Enag. Thank you for your comments. Blessing Igwebweze. I hope I'm pronouncing your names right. There's Joy Ovien. You've posted a question. We will come and have a look at that once we get to the Q&A session. Fumilayo Komolafe, thank you for your comment. Nsomo Jesu from Toronto, Canada, thank you for joining. And yeah, thank you so much for all the comments. Keep them coming. Keep the questions coming in as well. You can see that we are in for a treat, and not just for information alone. We're going to be, getting real skills, especially when we come to that part of the webinar where we're going to be talking about strategies. This will be, things that have worked through research, through application that we can all take away and we can apply in our day-to-day interaction with people living with some of these issues, and we can become better at what we do and how we relate to everyone, especially those living with some of these challenges. We'll be bringing on our next speaker very soon, and we just want to be sure that they're ready to come on. Whilst they're backstage and getting ready, I'm honored to read their bio so that you know a bit more about them. So we've got Dr. Melissa Caluso coming on for our next segment. And if you've been following us closely, she'll be talking about early recognition and diagnosis of neurodiverse conditions. Because when some of these conditions are diagnosed early, then management, modulating behavior and helping them with developmental challenges becomes a lot easier, because then they can get all the support from all the experts with all the assisted learning programs and all of the support that is available. They can have a full life to the extent of, to as much as possible. So I'll quickly read Dr. Melissa's bio and then we'll bring her on. Melissa Caluso is a registered psychologist and is one of the co-directors of AMC Psychology. She graduated with a Bachelor of Psychology from Western Sydney University and a Master of Professional Psychology from the University of Southern Queensland. She has over 14 years experience of working with children with autism spectrum disorder and other neurodevelopment disorders. The majority of our professional experience is in working with children from ages 2 to 10 years using behavior-based interventions. She's also experienced in administering a variety of psychometric, academic, and diagnostic assessment. Please make welcome Dr. Melissa.
Hello, everybody. Thank you. Thank you for the introduction. That was lovely.
Thank you for lending your voice to this conversation. I mean, it's amazing. 14 whole years of experience working with children aged between 2 and 10. I cannot wait to learn what you've got to share with us this evening. It is so amazing, and we're honored to have you join us on this platform.
Thank you. It's my pleasure. Those 14 years really have flown by. So I forget how long it's been until somebody says that number back to me. Working with autism has been a passion of mine for many years. And I think the more years I do it, the more presentations that I see and the more I continue to learn as well. So I'm hoping to share a little bit of that knowledge tonight. And my first presentation will be on early recognition and diagnosis of autism spectrum disorder and specific learning disorder. Hopefully my slides can come up. Yep, there we go. Wonderful. Alrighty. So first we'll be looking at autism spectrum disorder, or ASD for short. It was previously also known as Asperger's disorder or autistic disorder, but as research has developed, we have seen that it has been more of a spectrum, and they all kind of come under this umbrella term now. Often I have parents come to me for an initial consultation, and they're raising some concerns about behaviour that they're seeing, and not sure if there's something to be worried about yet. So this list is by no means exhaustive. It's not to say that every person with ASD will exhibit these types of symptoms or behaviours or presentations, but there are a few examples, and I'll talk through some of them. So one of the first ones that we see is limited eye contact when a child's name is called. And we find that parents will often just repeat the name, and the child won't turn and orient towards the person calling their name. And sometimes we think that there might be a hearing issue, but it's just a lack of attention and not understanding that social rule that when someone is calling my name, I am to attend to them. We also see sometimes some neutral facial expression. So it can be quite difficult to make young children on the spectrum laugh or smile. They tend to have quite a flat affect. There might also be some difficulty in making friends, and this is a little bit more prevalent when they're a little bit older. Toddlers, primary school children, they would prefer to play by themselves or engage in parallel play where they're playing next to a child, but not necessarily in a reciprocal interaction, turn-taking and sharing, that kind of thing. We might also see some examples of unusual play, again, alone or with objects, where they might have something like a toy car, and instead of the toy car driving around the road and picking up passengers and crashing, we might be spinning the wheels of that car or looking down sideways to watch the wheels. We might also just line up our toys rather than engage with them in a functional way. Or we might also pull our toys apart, because there might be quite a bit of interest in how does it work? How do I get this to go back together? What do the bits inside do? We can also see a little bit of unawareness with social cues or social rules. And this might be things like standing too close to people when we're having a conversation, or stroking people's face, touching their hair during play, which isn't necessarily wanted attention or affection from the other person's side. We also might see that they don't seek comfort from a parent, primary caregiver, teacher when they're upset or hurt. They kind of just internalize that and are a little bit more quiet. Another big sign that we see is a delay in language, and this is both in expressive and receptive language. So expressive language is our ability to speak, express ourselves, whether that's through voice or sign, and receptive language is our ability to understand what is said to us. There might be one or the other or both or neither. We also have some examples of repetitive behaviours. Now, this is quite a broad term, and there are a lot of different examples of this, but some of the most common ones that people would be aware of are things like hand flapping. This can be when the child is excited. They might be flapping their hands next to their face or looking at their fingers out the corner of their eyes. It can also serve as a self-stimulatory behaviour, where that behaviour itself just feels good. It's not necessarily to express an emotion. It's just their way of engaging and finding joy. It can also be things like rocking back and forth, making particular vocalizations or sounds, particularly for children who do have that expressive language delay. We might see more repetitive sounds, and possibly also children who are repeating particular phrases that they've heard before, maybe something that they've heard their teacher or their parents say, or they will script particular phrases from some of their preferred videos, and it's almost just like repeating the video themselves. Another big area that sometimes brings concern to parents is that their child seems to be quite upset when there is a change in their normal routine. And this can be something like you have to drive a different way to get to school because there's roadworks on the usual route, or this child will only drink from a particular water bottle, and if that water bottle is lost or broken, then we're having really big emotions when we have to try and move to a new water bottle or try and find it. We can also see this in children who insist on eating the same coloured food or the same texture of food, and if that food is not available, then we do have quite a big reaction. For some children, that can look like tantrums and meltdowns, where we see crying, screaming, absconding or running away from situations. It might be physical aggression towards others, hitting, biting, hair pulling, or self-injurious behaviours, where those behaviours are turned in on themselves. Again, it might be hitting themselves in the head or biting themselves, scratching their arms, that kind of thing when they're that distressed. Sometimes these tantrums and meltdowns are also quite distressing for parents because they can last anywhere from 10 minutes to 4 hours. So it's definitely something that we want to have a conversation about. Another big area is fixated interests. And again, this can be about lots of different topics. Typically, they're topics where children are looking to collect information and facts about. Some of the more common ones that I see are trains, models of trains, train lines, train stops. I have clients that can recite every train stop on all the lines in Sydney. So there are a lot of trains in Sydney. That's quite an impressive skill to have. It definitely helps mum when they're traveling around. But also things like makes and models of cars or superheroes, or a whole lot of information about space. I've had a client who was really, really interested in fruits and vegetables. So I can list a lot of exotic fruits and vegetables, and it's just something that I've learned from my clients. And another big one there, which Dr. Nee touched on in his presentation, is this hypo or hypersensitivity to sensory input. So for some children, they might be hyposensitive, so less sensitive to things like pain or temperature. They don't feel the weather when it's hot or cold like we do, and therefore their clothing doesn't necessarily match everybody else's. And kind of the flip side of that is some children who are hypersensitive or overly sensitive to particular sensory information, such as the texture of food or the taste or flavor, and they can tell when a brand has made a slight adjustment to their recipe. I had a client once who only ate this very particular muesli bar, and the company changed the recipe. So the mum thought that they'd be able to put the new muesli bar in the old wrapper, but the child was very much aware that it was not the same muesli bar that they liked. Also for sound, often they are quite sensitive to loud sounds, the sounds of babies crying, alarms, and that kind of thing. So if this sounds like your child, where to next? I think one important thing to note is that not all child development is the same. Like not every human is the same. Children do grow at different rates. So when it comes to things like language and play skills and social skills, they may be just developing a little bit differently to everybody else. And some of those play activities are age appropriate. So children will line up toys because they are learning to categorize shape and color anyway. But where we're seeing these behaviors that are occurring more often, or where the child becomes distressed when that is interrupted, that's when there might be a little bit of cause for concern there. Of course, it is important to keep in mind how old is the child, what's their development, is there any other medical history, are there coexisting diagnoses happening, intellectual impairment or a language disorder, ADHD, anxiety, that type of thing. But if you are concerned, trust your instinct. You are the expert in your child. kind of where to from there is have a conversation, have a chat to the daycare educator or the classroom teacher, speak to your doctor, a pediatrician, come and see a psych. As mentioned, early intervention is key. So the quicker we can get in there and have a look and have a bit of a chat about what's going on, then we can kind of start the process of having a look where we can help. So the diagnosis of autism, it can happen from as young as 12 months old, obviously depending on where those potential delays are happening. And we're doing that through assessment, observation. We're taking quite a detailed history and doing some particular activities to see how the child responds to those cues. Diagnosis can also be made later in life. So we do have adults who are diagnosed with autism, but when we're looking back retrospectively on their life, we are seeing that the symptoms were present during the developmental period, which is during their childhood. It is more commonly diagnosed in males than females currently, but it does present differently. The levels of ASD you may be familiar with, a level 1, a level 2, a level 3. They are based on the level of support required. So a level 1 diagnosis means there is requires support. Level 2 requires substantial support, and level 3 requires very substantial support. And that's kind of the difference between where we're seeing a child who is non-verbal, so not speaking, may have a difficult time being toilet trained, might have more significant behaviours, that kind of thing. We'd be looking at a level 3 diagnosis. I know sometimes parents are a little bit concerned about a diagnosis, but it is important to know that sometimes that diagnosis is the key to open up a door that will allow for additional support or resources to be available either at school or at home, to access therapies or particular funding sources depending on where you are in the world. Alrighty, so our other condition that we're looking at is specific learning disorder. This is the overarching umbrella term for difficulties in writing and reading and maths. The most common terms used are dyslexia, dysgraphia, and dyscalculia, but I'm just going to call it specific learning disorder as the overarching name there. So again, some signs that you might recognize in your child is that when they are reading aloud, they might read words incorrectly or slowly, or they might be hesitating, or they might just be guessing the words. They might also have difficulty sounding out the words or decoding, despite having learnt that at school. It's just kind of not clicking for them. Or they may actually be reading the text correctly, but not understanding what it is that's being read. And you'll be able to tell that because they can't answer questions about the text, the relationships between characters, or not being able to infer information, or not getting to the moral of the story, that kind of thing. In terms of writing, they might be writing their letters backwards, or forming them differently to how they typically look. They might be adding letters or missing them or substituting them with a completely different sound. We might also see while their letters and their words are okay, there might be multiple grammatical or punctuation errors, or their paragraph structure kind of doesn't have a flow, or there's a lack of clarity in their written ideas. And in terms of difficulties in maths, they might struggle to sequence the numbers or count on, or they might continue to count on their fingers after many years of practice. They might also not understand the relationship between numbers, or be able to remember math facts like their peers do, or be able to implement those facts and use them for real world problems. So if this is something that you're seeing in your child, we might be asking questions like, when should I be concerned? What do I do next? What do I do about diagnosis? Again, it is important to remember, be mindful of your child's age and development and their educational history. But again, do trust your parental instincts. This may not necessarily be so obvious when a child is young, but as those academic expectations increase, and that might be moving into formal schooling or getting a few years into primary school, as those expectations are more complex or more demanding, we might be able to see more of these difficulties becoming evident. And so we definitely want to be having a conversation. We're going to rule out other factors such as a cognitive impairment or visual or auditory difficulties. Is it that they can't see the board or they can't read the text? Can they not hear the instructions from the teacher? Is it a lack of attention or motivation instead? Are they proficient in the language that they are learning if they've recently moved or they speak a different language at home? Sometimes that's something that we have to be mindful of as well. And have they had adequate educational instruction? So have they been attending school for an amount of time where we should be seeing more academic progress than we are? Again, have a chat to the classroom teacher or teachers' aides if there are in the classroom, and see kind of where does your child fit compared to the grade standards. The school may be able to perform some of those learning assessments, particularly in terms of reading and spelling, which might give you a bit of an indication whether it is kind of beyond just a typical range of learning. Definitely consult with a psych, and we can do a battery of assessment where we are looking at cognitive ability, their attention, their academic performance. Sometimes we see that specific learning disorder is misdiagnosed as ADHD, where it does look like the child just isn't paying attention in class. However, it's actually that the work it's quite difficult for them because of a specific learning disorder. However, it's not to say that the two conditions can't co-occur. So we do see children who are diagnosed with specific learning disorder may also have ADHD. And that's the end of me. Short and sweet. Hopefully that was informative and got to the point. And I think you guys will see me in a little while. And I'll be talking about some intervention to address some of these issues too.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Melissa. That was excellent to hear from you. We have comments flooding in saying that they're appreciating what you're saying, and it was really insightful. And I really appreciated just the overview of what we can look for, what we can see in children, whether we're teachers or parents or just in same social circles, and then common questions, and then how to move forward, and if you have those concerns, how to move forward appropriately. So thank you so much.
My pleasure.
Alicia, it's been a pleasure having you on. I know we're still going to have you for the Q&A session, but my major takeaway from the conversation you just laid now was the fact that it has to be a collaborative effort. So you've got to have a chat if you're concerned as a parent. I like how you touched on that fact that, you know, that early signs that you pick on, and you're actually the expert in your own child's situation. So have a chat to the daycare, have a chat to your doctor, and you know they can then start walking through the process of correct diagnosis. Because you just said there that sometimes it might be that they're having other learning difficulties and it might not be what you suspect, but it is good to have that collaborative effort. And there's a saying where I come from in Africa, that it actually takes a village to raise a child. I know there aren't many villages in this part of the world, but it's a community effort. So it's got to be from the school, from the home, from the experts like yourself. So we've got to be open to seeking that help if we are concerned that something is not quite right. So I really like that you touched on that collaboration across all the different parts of, you know, diagnoses and helping the child develop properly. Thank you so very much for that
problem.
wonderful session.
Yep, you're absolutely right. Definitely does take a village. So I'm happy to be part of it.
Thank you so much. And thank you so much to all our audience. We see all the comments flooding in appreciation for what is being discussed tonight, and we're going to get to your comments and acknowledge them. And I've also noted that questions are coming in. Please keep them coming in, because that's the biggest segment of all of this that we're doing tonight, and we're going to touch on all those questions. And Anna, it's quite interesting because I've seen a few people that have joined and they've commented that they sort of can't place their finger on it. They think that children might have certain conditions and stuff like that, you know. And I'm just thinking to myself, and I'd like to take your input on this, like, you know, you've actually come to the right place, because at the end of all of these discussions tonight from our experts, you're going to have an idea of how to progress your diagnosis and what sort of conversations to have with your child's educator and stuff like that. But what do you think? Because, you know, I've seen a few comments where people have said specifically that they know that their child has got this condition, but others can really place their finger on it. What sort of, you know, what expectation can they have for the rest of the conversation that we're going to have on this webinar? What do you think they should look forward to?
Yeah, well, I think we've already seen a great glimpse of it, you know, very practical, simplified explanations of what we can see and what we can take note of as parents and mentors, just what to pay attention to. I really appreciate the practical learning as someone who's not as educated as these doctors, but can still take what they're teaching and apply it and have it make sense, I think is really valuable. And so I hope that takeaways from the audience can be the same, that they can maybe have some of those questions answered, maybe some more clarity on what they're experiencing with their child, and just understand a little bit deeper what's happening and the steps that they can take forward. I think in the end, this is a very practical learning experience on how we can help our children and how we can give them the best education that they need or the best social settings that they require based on their specific neurodivergence.
That is absolutely spot on, Anna. Thank you so much for that wonderful comment. And I think it's time, and you're going to do us the honors to bring on our next speaker. I think we've got Dr. Ayodele Rena coming on next. So you'll do us the honors in introducing with his bio, and we'll welcome him in.
Yes, my pleasure. So I'm going to introduce Dr. Renner, read off his bio, and then we're going to hear from him of common myths and mistakes surrounding neurodiversity. So Dr. Renner is a consultant pediatrician with 11 years of experience. He's also a social media influencer and health content creator. He's known as the Noisy Ninja Pediatrician on Instagram, where he shares free healthcare information and education with over 148,000 followers and reaching up to 3 million accounts monthly. I mean, wow, how inspirational and wonderful to offer that free healthcare information. He's Nigerian and most influential voice in child care and children's health, partnering with notable brands like GTB, Nestle, and Sanofi. Dr. Renner is a co-founder of Agnosis Care on Demand, a digital health platform providing tech-driven health solutions. He's been nominated for several awards, including the Force of Wellness and the Health Influencer of the Year. He has participated actively in campaigns to raise awareness and provide support for families who are living with neurodiverse children. So please welcome Dr. Renner.
Hello.
Hello,
Hannah.
Bio.
Hello.
Thank you so much. Hi, Abdullah.
It's
Hello,
a pleasure
everyone.
to have you on, Dr. Renner.
It's absolutely brilliant to be here. Thank you so much. It's such a pleasure to be here, and a very, warm welcome to everyone joining us from all over the world, whether you're in Sydney, Lagos, Paris, or the USA. Yes. So, it's a hard act to follow after Melissa has given us so many gems and so many details about early recognition of autism. While my task might seem like relatively straightforward and simple, it's important because I do get to address some of these concerns and some of these myths that have been carried along from one generation to the other. And as knowledge and information about neurodiversity has improved and research has changed our view of neurodiversity, information that is out there also needs to change accordingly so that we are taking the right information and spreading the right information around. So with that said, I would like to start my presentation. Okay, so great, thank you very much. So I'm going to be discussing common myths and mistakes surrounding neurodiversity because they exist and we need to address them. So this is a quote from Temple Grandin, and Temple Grandin is is an individual who is neurodiverse, and what she did was that because of her neurodiversity, she was able to view the world slightly differently than you and I would. So she looked at how cows were being herded in the industry in the US, and she realized that the cows were a little bit more skittish, a little bit more anxious than they needed to be, specifically because of the way in which they were being herded. But because she was neurodiverse and she could view how the cows viewed the world in a very remarkable way, she was able to make sure that the cows were treated more humanely and had a better experience in terms of how they were being herded. And so what she said is that as a neurodiverse person, she is different, she is not less. So that's the quote there from Temple Grandin. So let's address the first myth, which is neurodiversity is the same as autism. And I think we've already come to realize that neurodiversity and autism are not synonymous. Autism is one of the neurodiverse conditions. However, other neurodiverse conditions include attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, dyslexia, and dyscalculia. And so to limit neurodiversity to autism would be a myth. And you can see that there are some of the features of these conditions that fall under neurodiversity, including dyslexia, where there's difficulty with reading, Tourette syndrome that causes involuntary and physical, vocal tics, ASD, which involves degrees of difficulty in communicating with others and sensory overload. So they are quite different and they are distinct entities. And so neurodiversity is not the same as autism. So the next myth that I would like to address is the idea that neurodiverse individuals are all the same, and they are not. And I think it's something that we realize. And so there was a tendency to put all neurodiverse individuals in the same box. And the danger of doing this is that therapy ends up not being tailored to the individual. So if you assume that everybody with neurodiversity is the same, then it means that you're going to offer them the same kind of management. And we know that that isn't exactly the case, whereby some might need more speech therapy than others, others might need more psychological support, others might need occupational therapy more than certain others. And so they are not the same. So for patients, painting individuals with one brush is likely to make us overlook important individual needs and circumstances. Each neurodiverse individual has unique strengths and challenges, which hopefully we'll be discussing at some points during this webinar. So the third myth is that neurodiverse people cannot succeed in the work environment. I am almost certain that each one of us has probably encountered a neurodiverse individual in our work environment at some point or the other. That person that just seems not to be able to sit through the entire meeting, that person that just doesn't seem to want to say very much, despite the fact that you're encouraging him or her to do so. You just never know. They just might be neurodiverse and they have found ways and coping mechanisms and ways in which to mask and hide it. I think in this part of the world, unfortunately, what does tend to happen is that for a child who is neurodiverse and the parents aren't too sure of what's happening, they might label the child as being stubborn, as being unintelligent, as being recalcitrant, and they might resort to punitive measures that confuses the child. The child doesn't mean to ignore you. The child can't help it because that is the way in which he's processing the world. So depending on the severity of their condition, some neurodivergent individuals may not be capable of maintaining a job. So at the end of the day, neurodiverse conditions usually occur on a spectrum such that sometimes people might have a mild form of the condition, while others might have a more severe form. Fortunately, it's the minority that have the very severe form in which they will need very significant support, as Melissa had pointed out. But for those who have the mild to moderate forms, they are able to hold jobs and be competent and excel at their various chosen professions. So the fourth myth that we're going to be discussing is that neurodiversity and mental health conditions are the same. At some point, I do believe that this is something that was probably held to be correct and true, but we know that neurodiverse conditions are not mental health conditions per se. So while neurodiverse conditions affect how the brain is wired, they are considered to be more of behavioral conditions than mental health conditions. Now, mental health conditions would describe things like the neuroses and the psychosis. So the neuroses are conditions in which a person is in touch with reality and they just have certain traits that might disrupt their daily functioning, like anxiety, excessive anxiety. So anxiety disorders are considered to be a mental health challenge. Things like obsessive compulsive disorder are considered to be mental health challenges, such that they feel a compulsion to do certain things, whether it's hand washing, whether it's repeatedly checking the door to make sure that it's locked, just that, complete intrusiveness of those thoughts, that make them continuously want to engage in a particular act. The obsession is the thought, and then the compulsion is the action. And then you now have the psychosis, and the psychosis are conditions where they tend to be unusual phenomena that suggest that the person is out of touch with reality, such that they might have hallucinations, whether it's visual or auditory, they might be seeing things that are not there, they might be hearing things that are not there, they might be having certain what we call delusions, such that they might declare themselves to be greater, than they are, or to be hearing voices, those sorts of things. So individuals with neurodiversity are not considered to have a mental health condition. However, there are neurodiverse individuals actually can have mental health conditions coexisting with their condition, such as excessive anxiety, post-traumatic stress disorder, a predisposition to certain mental health conditions, but they are not considered to have a mental health condition. Okay? So the next myth that we're going to be discussing is the idea that neurodiverse individuals cannot communicate efficiently. It's a myth. Again, it's simply because I think the prototype neurodiverse condition is autism. And with autism, to some degree or other, they have an impairment in verbal communication, whether it is both verbal and non-verbal communication. And so people have sort of like taken that to be true across the board for all neurodiverse individuals, and that is not the case. A lot of neurodiverse individuals communicate very efficiently. They are fluent, they have great verbal abilities and prowess, and so they need to imagine that they don't communicate effectively. So some individuals who are neurodiverse are great communicators. Yes, they may have challenges with non-verbal communication and cues, but they should not limit the effort to assist them with effective communication. So the autism spectrum, a lot of them might have communication difficulties, but a few others with ADHD or some other types of neurodiverse conditions may communicate very fluently in both verbal and non-verbal domains. So the sixth myth is that neurodiversity is a term to make people feel better about their disability. So the term neurodiversity, like when I was in medical school and even in residence, neurodiversity wasn't really a concept, even though it was probably being, thought of and developed, but it wasn't something that was being widely taught. And this is because research really does change things, and it tends to evolve as time goes by. So neurodiversity was something that I began to hear even after I'd finished residence. And this is because we have come to realize that when it comes to describing people and how they process the world, neurodiversity is in a way of telling people that you don't have a disease, you don't have a disease condition. Your brain is just processing the world in a slightly different way than the rest of us do, but they have every potential to be as functional, as effective, and as useful as the next person or the neurotypical child. And so, the term was coined to make sure that people didn't box people who had neurodiverse conditions as having diseases, as having conditions that required active, disease management, so to say. So, the term was not coined to help them feel better about themselves. A lot of other terms have gradually become, because a lot of these terms have become a symbol of stigma. And because it is assumed that all neurodiverse individuals had a problem, in quotes, it tended to be a little challenging to use any other term. And so the term neurodiversity was coined, which helps to describe individuals who had these conditions that made them perceive the world in a different way. So it's not a way of making them feel better about themselves. It is the reality that they are simply not the same, they're not neurotypical, and they are processing the world in a different way than you and I. So the next myth is that children with neurodiversity are all geniuses. While we would like to think that the servant syndrome is something that every child who is neurodiverse has, it simply isn't the truth. Yes, there are some remarkable children who they will just take a look at a bunch of keys and then try them once. And after that, in a house of 27 doors, they know what key opens exactly what door. Or the child that Dr. Borire told us about, that was hyperfixated and knew the states, all the states in the US. There are some children with neurodiversity who have those remarkable talents, but they are the minority, and that's just the reality. The reality is that most children with neurodiversity will just be like the rest of us, not having any particularly amazing or remarkable talents. But there are those who are savants, and they will have skills that are unimaginably remarkable. So this isn't always the case. While some children with neurodiverse conditions have exceptional skills in certain areas, a lot more struggle with learning and academic tasks at school, especially those who have dyscalculia or dyslexia. They need patience and a little extra attention to succeed. And of course, I think the educational system, of course, also needs to take that into consideration, such that not everyone will learn the same things at the same pace. Okay. All right. So before I conclude, I would like to just talk about the fact that maybe one myth, because I was talking about neurodiversity as a whole and not autism spectrum disorder specifically, and I didn't talk about the idea that vaccines have been implicated in the cause of autism spectrum disease. Well, because I'm a pediatrician, and vaccines and vaccine-preventable diseases are very important to me, and taking vaccines and advocating for vaccines to prevent infectious diseases is important. I think I just have to point it out that vaccines do not cause autism. It just happens that around the time when the MMR, which was implicated in the cause of autism spectrum disease, and the major symptoms of autism spectrum disease appear around the same time, some researchers thought that they correlated, but unfortunately, that research has actually even been taken out of the journal in which it was published, because there were some flaws associated with that study that made it invalid. So, in conclusion, as with most other medical conditions, myths exist surrounding neurodiversity. It is important that we separate the facts from the fiction so that our expectations and management goals are realistic. So thank you all very much. We are neurodiverse children are not less. They are neurodiverse, they are not less. Thank you very much. These are my sources, and yeah.
Wow. Thank you very much. I really appreciated the myths that you've touched on. I've definitely heard probably all of them, actually. And that was excellent to hear your explanation on why those aren't true. I noticed a very common denominator was the one size does not fit all. It seems that because of this spectrum, we can't apply a statement that could be true. Like you said, some aren't able to communicate efficiently, and that can be true for some neurodiverse kids, but not to all. And we can't be applying these broad terms to the entire spectrum of children. So thank you so much. That was really valuable, and I appreciated that a lot.
Thank you, Hannah.
Thank you so much once again, Dr. Rainer, because I just felt like I was sitting in on an episode of the Mythbusters. That was what it felt like. Yeah, I don't know if you recall that popular series that comes on TV, and it just going busting all the myths. But one thing that I felt like it was important that you touched on was about that vaccines being implicated in some of these autism or autistic conditions. Because growing up in Nigeria, for instance, there was a time where it was also implicated, and people thought that the moment you take a certain vaccine, then there will be poliomyelitis in people. And I remember being part of that health campaign in some parts of southwestern Nigeria and some southern Nigerian states where they would refuse taking the vaccine. So it's very important, especially since we've got a lot of people from different parts of the world joining in on this conversation and listening in on this webinar, to understand that vaccines do not lead to autism. It's just like you mentioned, it just happens around the time when the child will have, needed to take that vaccination. And then that's about the time you start noticing certain conditions that you want to investigate. And you just think that is a causality. It is not. It's just happenstance. Thank you so much for shedding light on that. And I think that is, I heard earlier in your bio that you are the noisy Niger pediatrician. And I say that you are noisy for a reason, because if you're providing all of this information to sort of mute this information that might be out there, or, inappropriate information, and correct all of these myths, then it's a worthy cause. Thank you so very much for that. We really had
Thank you,
an
Viola.
insightful session with you.
Much.
Oh,
Wonderful.
Awesome, Anna. This has just been amazing. It has
Wonderful.
just been amazing.
Yeah, and the comments are definitely reflecting that. We have so many flooding in, just saying how much they're appreciating what we're learning, and we're getting those questions. We encourage you to continue putting these questions in. That's the purpose of this webinar, is so we can help answer questions and learn more together. So I'd encourage these comments. There's so many flooding in, and we appreciate it so much. Continue to put your questions in. They'll be answered at the end.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that. And you're spot on. So please, to everyone that's a part of this, put the questions in there. We're going to come to that at the end of all of this conversation, and we will definitely tackle those questions. And I can assure you, there's enough knowledge in the house, there's enough wisdom in the house, there's enough practice in the house to speak to your concerns, and you will definitely take away something from this.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's time to bring on our final speaker for this event. And by no means is this the end to all that we're talking about tonight, because like we've said a few times, we're going to have the Q&A session coming on, and there'll still be a lot to talk about. So don't go anywhere. But we're bringing on our next speaker now, and this is a personal delight that I'm bringing on this person, because he's a personal friend of the community here, and he's such a voice. He's making such an impact in Sydney, Australia, and within the medical space. Is Dr. Folorunso Oyekon. He's a consultant psychiatrist specializing in addiction psychiatry. He obtained his medical qualification from Obafemi Awolowo University in Nigeria. His psychiatry training took place in the United Kingdom, Ireland, and New Zealand. Dr. Oyekon is a fellow of the Royal Australia and New Zealand College of Psychiatry. His interests span a wide variety of mental health disorders, including substance use disorders, mood disorders, anxiety disorders, and ADHD. Beyond his clinical work, Dr. Oyekon is passionate about medical education and enjoys teaching and mentoring medical trainees. He currently serves as the clinical director of Bankstown Mental Health Services in Sydney, New South Wales, within the public health sector. Additionally, he has established a successful private practice. So please join me in bringing on Dr. Oyekon.
Hey, thank you guys. Thank you for the introduction. Yeah, look, I'm going to be presenting ADHD from adolescence to adulthood. Again, my name is Folonsho Oyekon. I am a psychiatrist. I'm based in Sydney, as you've heard. And in addition to a wide variety of mental health conditions, I also manage ADHD. I typically see patients from about the age of 16 years up to about 65 years. So let's get into it. So what is ADHD? So ADHD is attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. It is a neurodevelopmental disorder. And when you hear neurodevelopmental, such a big word, but these are disorders that actually affect the development of the nervous system, and they affect how the brain develops and functions. They show up in early adulthood, resulting in, emotional and motor difficulties at times, and the impact on the individual's ability to learn, communicate, and interact with other people. Melissa has touched on some other neurodevelopmental disorders like ASD, that's a autism spectrum disorder, intellectual disability, and other learning disabilities. So back to ADHD, it's a very common condition. I think everybody has heard about ADHD. It is a condition that is characterized by patterns of inattention and or hyperactivity with impulsivity that interferes with functioning and development. So now there are two symptom groups when we talk about ADHD. We have the inattentive symptoms, and have the hyperactive and impulsive and symptom group. I'm going to start by going through the inattentive symptoms. Generally, individuals with inattentive symptoms often fail to give close attention to details. I want us to be mindful of the word often, something that happens frequently. So it's not something that happens every now and then. The individual has difficulty sustaining attention in play or in other tasks. They struggle to listen when spoken to directly. Oftentimes it's as if they're with the fairies or they're in the clouds. They do not follow through on instructions and fail to finish schoolwork and duties in the workplace. Homework are left undone. You give them tasks to do, they're half done or not done at all. Often they have difficulty organizing tasks and activities. Their room is always in a mess. Their desk is in a mess. They just can't get themselves together. They avoid, tasks that require sustained mental effort. If it's too hard, they don't want to have a power of it. If it's too hard, they do the minimum they can do to get out of it. They lose things frequently. The boots are missing, the shoes are missing, glasses are missing, phones are missing. They're always misplacing things, and they get distracted easily. It's just very, very difficult to maintain focus, and they are very forgetful. They are very forgetful of daily activities. Now, the other symptom group is the hyperactive and impulsive symptom group. Hyperactive and impulse. Those two words, they explain themselves. The individual, again, notice often, fidgets or taps their hands or feet or squirms in their seat. It's just very hard to kind of sit in a meeting. They're always shifting from leg to leg, getting up to go to the toilet, to get coffee, to get a glass of water. It's just very hard, to be in one place. Like I said, they often leave their seats in situations where remaining seated is expected. They just get up, at the office, they're just moving from desk to desk. They just can't be in one place for very long. Now, they run about or climb in situations where it is inappropriate. They are unable to engage in leisure activities quietly. Especially you see these kids with ADHD, they're full of energy, they're running about, they're screaming, they don't really give a hoot for the feelings or the sensitivities of other people around them. And it's as if they are on the go. It's almost as if they are driven by a motor. They just don't stop. They can run from AM to PM and not be tired. And they are chatterboxes. They talk excessively. It's one topic to the other. They weigh you down with their conversation sometimes. And this also happens frequently in class. They answer the question before the teacher finishes the question. They complete other people's sentences, and they can't wait for their turn in conversation. They also have difficulty waiting for their turn, and it's always kind of like a pain to wait in a line. And they're very intrusive, they're very interruptive with other people. So when we talk about ADHD, there are types of ADHD. There are three types of ADHD. Say ADHD, the inattentive type. We say ADHD, the hyperactive and impulsive type, or we say ADHD, the combined type. So and manifestation depends on the individual, their age. If you're saying ADHD with inattentive type, for instance, the individual must have at least 6 inattentive symptoms, like I listed earlier on, to meet that criteria. If you're talking about ADHD, hyperactive and impulsive type, they have to kind of like meet at least 6 symptoms of the hyperactive symptoms that are listed earlier on. And the mixed type or the combined type, you have symptoms of both the inattentive and hyperactive type. If you are looking at the most common type is the ADHD combined type in about 50% of cases. The inattentive type in about 30% of cases, and the hyperactive type in about 10 to 15% of cases of ADHD. So it's not enough to have the symptoms. There are other important diagnostic considerations before making a diagnosis of ADHD. One of that is that symptoms have to be present before the age of 12. So if symptoms start after 12 years old, then maybe you want to be looking at something else that could be responsible for that. Now the tricky part about this also is that there are some children that come from families where they are not very mental health literate. Some families are kind of like in denial of something going on. So nothing might actually happen before the age of 12. So we're kind of like seeing a lot of people actually being diagnosed after 12, after they've actually gotten into secondary school, where they're beginning to struggle. Now, the other diagnostic consideration is that symptoms have to be present in at least 2 settings. Okay, so if a child is only restless or doesn't pay attention at school, but is a model child at home, something is going on at school. And if it's the other way around, something is going on at home, that needs to be investigated. So it has to be in 2 or more settings, that are at home, or school, or work, or with friends or relatives, or in other activities. Okay, and symptoms, of course, have to interfere the quality of social, academic, and occupational functioning. So talking about the trajectory from childhood to adulthood, while it is thought to be traditionally a disorder of children and adolescents, the condition is prevalent even in adulthood. The worldwide prevalence is about 7% in children and about 2.5% in adults. Does that mean that ADHD kind of disappears as people get older? No, I think what happens is that as people grow, they develop coping mechanisms. They find a way of managing their symptoms to the extent that it is not as bothersome as it was when they were younger. Of note is that hyperactivity tends to decrease with age. You know, it's very rare for us to see an adult that, you know, is always cartwheeling and doing somersaults and things like that as they go older. You know, but that doesn't mean that the symptoms of ADHD go away. You know, the symptoms don't always go away. In fact, you know, ADHD persists into adulthood, with about 60% of children and adolescents continue to meet that criteria as they go older. So what does it look like in young adults? Okay, all right. So there is chronic procrastination. You know, they are always putting things forward. You know, they leave things to the last minute. You know, their homework, you know, they leave it, you know, to the day before submission, and often need to be asking for extension. You know, there's difficulty starting tasks. They know they have to be doing something, and they're just sitting down there staring at it and not able to just kind of like get started. And once they start, sometimes, you know, it's either they get distracted and they're not able to complete whatever task that they've initiated. Poor time management, you know, it's either the kind of like they're always late, you know, they miss appointments or deadlines, and you know, that causes a lot of difficulty for them. Now, there's difficulty organizing daily tasks. You know, their living spaces are cluttered. You know, their workspaces are cluttered, and there's frequent loss of important items. Or, you know, they struggle in meetings. You know, it's either they can't sit still, they have to get up and go out. You know, frequently get up to make coffees. You know, talking out of turn, and you know, that makes them very annoying workers. There's that feeling of restlessness. You know, they're just unable to relax. They describe that internal restlessness rather than an overt physical activity. You know, they struggle with engaging in quiet sedentary activities, preferring constant movement or mental stimulation. They get bored easily. You know, they're frequently changing jobs. You know, they're always looking for a new challenge. They don't stick with one thing for too long. Well, the impulsivity aspect of it, you know, there's impulsive spending. You know, they spend without thinking. They're quick to make decisions without considering the long-term impact. And like I said earlier, they're frequently switching jobs and relationships also. You know, having conversations with them is difficult. You know, they often come across rude. You know, and there's that emotional impulsivity. They're quick to anger. Little things make them very, very angry. Yes, you know, they suffer mood swings, and you know, struggle to control their emotions. So how do we make a diagnosis of, you know, ADHD? You know, I've listed, I have a list of specialists here that are involved in making a diagnosis, but it also involves the parent. It also involves class teachers. You know, I mean, you know your child. If you have a suspicion that something is wrong, you know, approach your GP at least. You know, who would be wise to refer you to the appropriate specialists. You know, teachers also do a good job of picking these things up, and when they pick them up, you know, they inform parents that, look, we have our suspicions about something going on with your kid. Maybe you should seek, you know, the intervention of a specialist. So psychiatrists mostly will treat ADHD in adults and adolescents. Pediatrician would, you know, there are doctors that look after children. You know, neurologists like Dr. Brewery and psychologists also play a part in making a diagnosis of ADHD. So, you know, I mean, it is an extensive process arriving at a diagnosis of ADHD. It usually starts with taking a history. You know, we want to find out what happened during pregnancy. You know, did mom smoke during pregnancy? Was she drinking alcohol during pregnancy? Was she ill during pregnancy? What kind of delivery did she have? You know, were you sick as a child? You know, are there family members that have the condition? You know, so there's extensive medical history that is taken, and observing the patient also. Sometimes, you know, just looking at the patient in front of you gives the diagnosis away. You know, they just can't sit still. in your office, the child is probably running around, or under the desk, or is jumping somewhere, scattering the whole place. Or in adults, it's just that the conversation is very difficult sometimes because they just talk too much. It's even very hard to get your questions in, or they're just fidgeting and just kind of tapping away, very anxious. Sometimes we use checklists and assessment tools. And then these days, there's a lot of self-written assessment tools on the internet that people use to kind of like, self-assess themselves before taking themselves to their GP, seeking for more specialist assessment. And it's also very important to speak to carers, and significant orders, because they kind of give us a better history of what is. Sometimes even the patient is not sure what's going on. But if you talk to the parent, they can tell you what's been happening since childhood. If you talk to their partner, they can tell you how they are at home and gives more insight, into their situation. School reports, very, very important. I use this a lot. And it's not all about the grades. When we look at school reports, it's not the grades that we're looking at. We're looking at what the teachers kind of feel and say about the behavior of the person. It goes a long way in helping us make a diagnosis of ADHD. All right. So we also kind of like do a bit of neuropsychological testing, and this evaluates cognitive abilities like memory and attention, academic skills like reading and maths, and executive functions like planning, organizing, and problem solving. A physical exam is also very important, because there could be physical health issues that could be presenting like ADHD. Kids that have poor vision and hearing problems are often, very restless and inattentive in class. And it's amazing how a pair of glasses or hearing aids can make a difference, in the life of a child. And it's also very important to screen for other mental health issues, for two reasons. Some mental health conditions can present as ADHD. People that have, have experienced trauma, complex traumatic conditions, anxiety, even depression can present like ADHD at times. And the other reason also is that mental health conditions can also coexist, with ADHD, because life is so hard and life is so tough. There's a lot of anxiety, there's a lot of self-doubt, there's a lot of negative thinking. So screening for mental health issues is also very important, so as to be able to kind of like give the right treatment. So I mentioned some challenges as teenagers transition to adulthood, or adolescents transition to adulthood. The most common is academic, really. Transitioning from high school to college or vocational training, requires a lot of self-discipline and time management and organizational skills. When kids are in school, there is in high school there is structured support, but once they leave high school, you're actually left to your own devices, and then they begin to struggle, with meeting deadlines and managing coursework and studying independently. And a lot of dropouts from university, a lot of uncompleted traineeship. We see a lot of that in people, in adolescents and adults that have ADHD. And there's also challenges in executive functioning, such as planning, prioritizing things is very difficult, and following through on tasks. These are some of the challenges that you see as people get older. Then there are workplace issues. It's just hard, for them to look for work sometimes. I have a patient that, I see every 3 months, and, how many jobs have you applied for? Oh, I started one, I didn't finish it. It's just very hard sometimes, searching for jobs, performing well at interviews, because of their communication skills. They don't do well in interviews, and because of lack of self-confidence. Sometimes it's they don't get a second look past the first stage of the interview, and they have job issues also. When they eventually get a job, they don't get a job when they don't get to work on time. Their performance at work is not great. They keep making silly mistakes at work. Because of their attention, a lot of things get past them. They struggle to meet deadlines. And that gets a bit tough, for these people to handle. The issues with the financial issues also, managing money, paying bills, and budgeting can be difficult with people with ADHD. And there's impulsive spending. People can, on their way from work, just buy a motorcycle. Even though they haven't paid their house rent. And there's a lot of fines for forgetting to pay bills and things like that. Relationships is also very tricky. They struggle to maintain friendship and romantic relationships, because, you plan a date and don't turn up for your date, for instance, or, your partner or your girlfriend is talking to you and you're not paying attention, or, something is said and you just fly off the handle. And it's just a challenge, for a lot of young people with ADHD to navigate. So time management is also another issue. Is another issue. I think we've talked about that a few times. And they also procrastinate a bit. I'm just moving a bit fast now because I'm kind of like mindful of the time. So how is ADHD treated? So medication is key. And when we talk about medication, we have two types of medication. We have stimulant medication and we have non-stimulant medication. When we talk stimulants medication, these are amphetamine-like substances in very, very tiny doses. Examples would be things like Ritalin, Concerta, the Vyvanse, and they work very well. What they do is that they increase the activity of dopamine and norepinephrine in the brain. When Dr. Burire was talking earlier on, he talked about the prefrontal cortex and the amygdala and the other brain centers there that have reduced level of dopamine. What the medication does is to increase the level of dopamine in those areas, help thereby improving attention and concentration. We also have non-stimulant medication, things like Statera and Intuliv. They're also very effective. Okay, but the thing about non-stimulant medication is that they probably work a bit. It takes a bit of time for them to work. They don't work as quickly as stimulant medication. We also have cognitive behavioral therapy. So cognitive behavioral therapy, this therapy helps individuals with ADHD, to develop skills, to manage their symptoms, such as improving organization, time management, and emotional regulation. CBT is actually, delivered, by a psychologist, and it's actually very helpful as an adjunct to medication. And social skills training. This therapy helps individuals with ADHD learn appropriate social skills and how to, improve communication, how to comport themselves in social settings. Educational support. Many times I've written support letters to high schools, support letters to universities, asking for people with ADHD to be given extra time with their assignments, extra time with their exams. If they're having exams, they should be put in a quiet room where there's not a lot of distraction, and things like that go on a long way to help people with ADHD achieve their educational goals. Our lifestyle changes. Healthy diet is also very important. Multivitamins, zinc, magnesium, have been thought to help improve symptoms of ADHD. Omega-3 fatty acids are also beneficial, and artificial colors and preservatives are better avoided. Regular exercise is also very useful, especially in people that have the hyperactive, impulsive type of ADHD. Structure is very good. When there is routine and structure, It helps reduce distractions and it helps improve time management. With routine and structure also, people are less likely to lose things because they have a particular place where they put things. They know where to find that thing, and if they're used to that routine, yeah, that works well for them. We also advocate that people join support groups. It's good to have a place, where you can, discuss with people with similar, shared and lived experiences, where people can support each other emotionally, and share practical tips, about what helps and how to get past, the challenges that ADHD brings. So of note, things to consider when seeking treatment, because a lot of people are very, very skeptical about medication when they hear amphetamines, when they hear stimulants, they shudder. But the truth about it is that stimulant medication for ADHD, stimulant medication is more effective than non-stimulant medication. Most of my patients, not just one, most of them, a lot of them will just come after a week of starting treatment. Life-changing. Life-changing. That's the word that a lot of people use. It makes a huge difference. People that have struggled to function all of a sudden start doing very well. People that struggle to focus are able to concentrate and start a task from beginning to the end. All of a sudden, the performance at work, has changed from shoddy, to very good. So stimulant medication are very, very, very effective. And non-stimulants are also very effective, but it takes a longer time for them to kick in. It's not everybody that would be able to use a stimulant, so non-stimulants are available for those kind of people. Now, we also have non-medication treatments. We talked about the CBTs, we talked about the ADHD coaching, but the thing is that, they are less effective than medication, but they are very good as adjunct. These are things that one should know when it's time to consider whether we should treat ADHD. Now, other strategies for support. Transitional planning is also very, very important. Early and structured transitional planning involving parents, educators, healthcare providers can help adolescents prepare for the challenges of adulthood. Everybody needs to be informed about what ADHD is, including, the adolescent, even as they prepare for adulthood. What I've seen is that in some instances, an adolescent finishes high school and feel not understanding their condition, feel like, okay, I'm done with high school, I don't need to take my medication anymore. And then they get into the real world and then they begin to struggle. So they need to know what's going on. The parents also need to be, everybody needs to be on board. And the other thing also is that people wait till, because a lot of pediatricians will stop seeing their patients at the age of 18. And then after 18, the patient then sees an adult psychiatrist who specializes in treating ADHD. Unfortunately, when people wait till they're 18 before they start looking for a psychiatrist, there can be a significant break. Sorry about that. So there can be a significant break, and that significant break, can have significant consequences. So by the time a child is, 16, 17, plans should be in place on how to, move across to an adult service. Okay. And ADHD coaching is also very important. Cognitive therapy and other therapeutic interventions can provide ongoing support for developing skills needed to navigate life. Support networks. Strong support networks is also very important, particularly, friends, family, and mentors. It's very good when, it's not just the patient, when mom and dad and brothers and sisters, they understand what's happening, and they are able to support the individual better. When friends, understand what's going on, then they're able to tolerate, and support their friend a bit better. But when people lack information about what's going on, it's only a matter of time before the individual is ostracized. So what's the prognosis of ADHD? Look, it is a lifelong condition, okay, and ongoing treatment is often necessary. But again, people develop coping mechanisms. We've seen people as they've grown older in life and develop skills on how to manage, their challenges. A lot of people have felt, well, I want to try going off medication, and that's been okay. Untreated ADHD in childhood can lead to difficulties in academic performance, social interactions, and self-esteem. And adolescents with ADHD may be at a higher risk of developing other mental health issues such as anxiety, depression, and substance abuse. And there's a high risk of criminality and unwanted pregnancy in people with ADHD. The transition to high school and institutions of higher learning and the increased academic demands can also exacerbate ADHD symptoms. With appropriate treatment, adults with ADHD can achieve success in their careers, maintain healthy relationships, and lead satisfying lives. I've seen MPs, with ADHD. I have, doctors with ADHD. They're engineers, with ADHD that are doing well with treatment. Early diagnosis and intervention are critical for improving long-term outcomes. Quickly, in summary, I know I've gone a bit over time. ADHD is a neurodevelopmental disorder affecting both children and adults. It is characterized by persistent patterns of inattention and hyperactivity and impulsivity. ADHD often persists into adulthood, with many individuals continuing to experience symptoms. These symptoms may change in how they present as the person grows older, with hyperactivity often decreasing with age. The diagnostic process involves taking a medical history, observing behavior, and possibly conducting psychological testing. Screening for other mental health conditions is also important. Treatment involves medication, behavioral therapy, and lifestyle changes. Early transition planning, ongoing therapy or coaching, and a strong support network are crucial for helping young adults with ADHD navigate the challenges of adulthood. And that's it. And I apologize for going over time. Thank you.
Thank you so very much, Dr. O, as we popularly call you in this part of the world. We truly appreciate the depth that you've gone to shed a lot of light on ADHD. And I truly appreciate that angle, especially from having this holistic approach to diagnosis, where you were talking about possible substance abuse in pregnancy. Could that have been the reason such a person, when they become teenagers or adolescents or adults, are presenting with ADHD symptoms? That was really, really good. I really had a thorough understanding of all the presentation and what you spoke about. That was quite in-depth. Anna, what do you think? What do you feel about this presentation that we've just listened to? Because I thought you really went in-depth. I'd like to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, no, it was excellent. I appreciated the depth. I appreciated the overall understanding specifically surrounding ADHD. It was really interesting to hear that there were actually 3 categories. I wasn't aware of that in the past. And I actually had a quick question in regards to those 3 categories. You mentioned that there's a combine of the 2. I wonder if we see that as a combined 50-50, or if there's a different percentage that sometimes they can be combined more hyperactive than inattentive, or if it's only the 50-50. I wonder if you could answer that for me quickly.
Look, it's very, very tricky. I guess when you say combined, I mean, it's a numbers game, okay? To reach that, you have to have at least 7 of the inattentive and 7 of the hyperactive together. But again, individuals, are different. Some people might have 10 of the hyperactive and 7 of the inattentive, or vice versa. So look, yeah, it's very difficult to say that it's this percentage or the other. Yeah, but look, if it's combined, it can have different presentations depending on the severity also.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for that.
Cheers.
Thank you so much. And we thank your audience, joining in from all the parts of the world. We see your comments, we appreciate them. We thank you for all the questions that are coming in. Keep them coming in, because, you're still in for a treat, because we're bringing back someone that you've just listened to, and they'll be talking more about other areas. You know, we're looking now at evidence-based interventions. We've heard about, you know, all the different things that could happen, the SLDs, how the community network needs to be there. So we're bringing back Melissa to talk to us about evidence-based interventions. She doesn't need any introduction now, so we just let her do a thing, not just wow us, but leave us with a lot of information as well. Thank you for coming back, Melissa.
No problem. It's been great listening to all the other presentations. So hopefully we don't have cognitive overload yet, and there's still some space for a little bit more information. This is typically where we see a lot of questions. It's like, yep, okay, I've got all the information about what the possible diagnoses could be and how I do that, but what do I actually do? How do I help? And so I'm going to give quite a brief overview of how to address both intervention for ASD and for specific learning disorder. So typically for ASD, we are looking at a multidisciplinary approach. There are a lot of different health and allied health professionals that will work together to help your child build skills. And there's often quite an overlap in what the different professionals will do as well. Your child might need some of these services, they might need all of them, they might need some of them at different times throughout their life, depending on what the difficulties are or what the presentation is at the time. One of the first services that someone will attend is speech therapy, and often that's where we're seeing clients with that expressive or receptive language delay, because the faster we can get functional communication in there, then the child is able to express their needs or their wants, and often that in itself will lead to a decrease in behavior. So a child that is having frequent tantrums or engaging in aggression is their form of communication, but it can be difficult for the adults around that child to understand what it is that they want. Are you in pain? Are you hungry? Is something too loud? Do you not want to play with this right now? So the faster we can give them a functional form of communication, then that's kind of gives that child the power to be able to express themselves much more effectively. And that's not necessarily just vocally. So often we are looking for verbal communication, but for some children that does develop later. So a speech pathologist will look for other things, and they might implement sign or augmentative and alternative communication styles, where we're looking at particular devices and apps that will give that vocal outputs, and the child would learn how to use that app to be able to communicate. Psychology, this is obviously the part that I do, and we are looking at a range of different areas that we help with: improving play and social skills, assisting children to identify the emotion that they're feeling, and effective ways to regulate and communicate that emotion with other people. We are also supporting the family members, the schools around that child as well, to help them cope. And we might also be treating some comorbid conditions like ADHD, anxiety, things like that that kind of come up as well. A child might need occupational therapy if they're needing help with fine or gross motor skills, or some adaptive functioning skills such as dressing or feeding, toileting, showering, that kind of thing. In some cases, there might be a need for behaviour support or behaviour therapist. This might be for children that are engaging in high frequency behaviours or high intensity behaviours. And these particular practitioners do have special training in how to manage these quite intense behaviours effectively. They will have particular protocols, something like restrictive practice potentially, which does have to be done under quite strict supervision with the goal of reducing that over time. Because obviously we would prefer to build skills, but sometimes we do need something in the interim to help. A child might need to see a physiotherapist to assist with movement or body strength. A dietitian, particularly because lots of children with ASD might have a restrictive diet, As mentioned before, it might be a particular color or a particular texture. They might not eat much. There might be some anxiety linked to eating. So a dietitian might be able to assist there as well. And of course, we have our medical professionals as well, our pediatricians and our psychiatrists, which are looking at the medical side of things. They're helping with medication, and there's often a whole lot of back and forth with the peds and the psychiatrists as well. It's important when we're talking about intervention that one of the first things that we work on before we're building skills is actually rapport. We do want a child or a teenager to like the person that they're working with. Once we've been able to build that positive relationship, then it's going to be a lot easier for that professional to push them a little bit and challenge them in their sessions, much like it is for adults. We like to have good relationships with our employers or our colleagues before we can kind of push them a little bit. It's also important to focus on, as mentioned, building functional skills for the child with autism, and that's around language and play and social skills and adaptive skills and executive functioning. There's so many different aspects that may be that may need attention, and we want to always be monitoring that. We are also looking at reducing challenging behavior, particularly where it's hurting others or hurting themselves. We want to be managing risk as well there. Also addressing other related difficulties. Sleep is a big thing, which can then obviously also impact our mood and our stress, our diet. These are all things to keep in mind. And ensuring that the skills that they're learning in a clinical setting can be generalized to the rest of their life. So are they implementing these skills at home? Are they implementing these skills at school? Are they utilizing it to the best of their ability? Are there barriers, and what can we do to address that? Similarly, for a specific learning disorder, intervention is typically focused on education and quality education at that. And that might be through a schooling system or through private intervention, private tutoring. And we are looking for education and educational programs that are intensive and individualized to that child's needs. So a child with dyslexia should be taught in a particular way, which might be different to their classmates. And it is important that our teachers are aware of this, because the prevalence rates are currently 1 in 10 children will have a specific learning disorder. So there might be a couple in each class. So it's just another thing for teachers to keep in the back of their mind. Where possible, we want to make learning as fun and as engaging as possible, and also incorporating that child's interests. For a child who's really interested in, say, Pokemon, and if they're having some difficulty with reading or writing, if we can write a piece about Pokemon or read a book about Pokemon, then they're going to be more likely to want to engage in the learning, particularly where we're seeing children or teenagers who are aware that they're having these difficulties academically. It just keeps it a little bit more interesting and motivating. We also want to be mindful to reinforce effort and not just outcome. It can be quite tedious and overwhelming to continue to struggle in a particular aspect of your learning. And so recognizing the child for that. I know this is really hard for you, but great job. I love that you're persevering, is better than you got it wrong again. Also teaching in different ways, so using different methods, and that might be incorporating visuals. It might be using computer programs or apps, using rhythm or music to teach math skills that are difficult for a child to pick up. Obviously, our repetition and practice are quite helpful. However, it is important to be mindful that we don't want it to become overwhelming for that child. For someone who is aware that they are not good at reading, we don't want to make them just read for hours and hours, because they will probably grow to despise it even more, which is not the goal of what we're trying to do. And there might need to be some environmental changes. It might be something like sitting closer to the teacher to have more easy access to help, or sitting closer to the whiteboard so you have more access to the resources that you need or something like that. For children with specific learning disorder, they may need speech therapy, and that might be for their phonological awareness, or if there's some difficulty with how they understand speech sounds. That's obviously on a case-by-case basis. It's not necessarily for everybody. Similarly, they might need to consult with an occupational therapist if we're looking at something like dysgraphia, where they need some help with handwriting or fine motor. And potentially a psych. We do see some children with specific learning disorder, and it's typically more for the related anxiety or stress or self-consciousness that might come when they're aware that they're behind their peers, more so than actually treating the specific learning disorder itself. And as I mentioned before, there might be some comorbid ADHD symptoms at the same time. I know we're going to have another conversation about how we support parents in a little bit, but I do think it is important to raise parents when we're talking about intervention. While a child might come and have an appointment with me once a fortnight or once a month, it is the parent that's doing the majority of the intervention work, at least for psych. And so the parents actually do play an active role, and we do want them to ask us questions and learn from us and implement those strategies at home and get the teachers on board to implement them at school, because where there's a more consistency in the strategies, we are more likely to see better treatment outcomes. But more importantly, before we're even talking about intervention, we do want parents to be confident enough to ask for help. And it can, of course, can be from professionals, but also their family and friends. Kind of be aware where you're in over your head and it's like, you know what, I'm struggling with my child. I'm not sure why, but can someone help me? And there's definitely people out there that are more than willing to help. And along that line, we definitely want parents to look after themselves first. You can't help your child if you're not okay. And I very often use the aeroplane analogy. If anyone's ever been on a flight, during the safety briefing, the flight attendants will say, if the oxygen mask drops from the top, put your oxygen mask on before you help somebody else. Because if you're not okay first, how can you be expected to help somebody else, your child included? And I know lots of parents feel a lot of that pressure and that responsibility to help their child, but you can only do that if you're okay first, and that might be seeking help for yourself at the same time. Yep, early intervention is key. What does early intervention mean? That's different for each person. It's when you're ready. Get as many people on board as you can, and they will help you through that process. And we definitely want to celebrate the small wins. So again, reinforcing a child for trying. You can see that there's been this tiny little bit of improvement from last week, and that's fantastic because all the little small successes will help to build up their confidence. And we're on the way to a lifelong process of learning and bettering. So just a little bit of help there for the parents in how they can support their children and the rest of their team. And that's the end of that one. That was a nice quick summary into how we can support children and their families. And I believe somebody may be joining me shortly. Yes.
Wonderful. Thank you for that.
Alicia. Yeah, go ahead.
No problem.
It was so great. I love to hear the interventions that we can have for kids and the multidisciplinary approach in just incorporating those different specialists for those specific aspects of attending to those children's needs. It's great things. I know we're about to hear from you and Dr. Renner as well about support strategies for parents, because at the end there you mentioned how you can't help somebody be okay if you're not okay yourself. And I think that that is a great segue into this. So we need to support the parents and the teachers. And I would encourage the audience, if you're here and you're listening, you're doing that for yourself and you're doing that for your child. And that's a great step. But really looking forward to hearing these strategies that you're going to present to us. So thank you so much.
Absolutely. And
Yeah.
that's actually a very good way to come into the next segment, which is looking at support strategy for parents. And we're going to have the duo of Dr. Rena and Melissa to help us with that. So if you're in on this, don't go anywhere. You don't want to miss this, because we've seen a few comments in the comment section where people have already have children diagnosed with some of these conditions. So this is the part you've been waiting for. These are the support strategies for parents. We've looked at some of the interventions that are available for people with the condition. And, on that note that Melissa mentioned, that you need help yourself, you need support yourself. So we're going into that, and it's a deep dive. Don't go anywhere. Get all the value you can get out of this. Thank you so much, Dr. Rena and Melissa.
No problem. My
Okay,
pleasure.
thanks. Yeah, great stuff. Thanks, Abiola. Thanks, Hannah. So I guess I mean Melissa has already touched on very important points in terms of the coping strategies for parents, but I'd like to just emphasize and highlight the importance of support groups. So support groups are very important, and I find that in the West, support groups are so much more available, readily available than here in Nigeria, because maybe there's more awareness and they realize that when it comes to helping children with neurodiversity, you do need to interact with parents who have gone through the same thing to understand what the experiences have been like, to interact with them and get insights on what works for them, where they got help from, things that they tried that worked, things that they tried that didn't, because it's as important to learn from one's mistakes as it is to learn from one's successes. Perhaps mistakes even teach you much more than the successes do. So I think support groups are very important. I've been involved in certain campaigns in the past where children with neurodiversity and their parents were gathered at various forums organized by certain banks in Nigeria to raise awareness. And in those forums, we actually got various healthcare professionals together, including psychologists, psychiatrists, pediatricians, and occupational therapists, to just give the parents the opportunity to just come and have that discussion. But that's occasionally. While there might be some structured support groups, I'm not aware that they are as vibrant or as dynamic and effective as those that you find in the West. But I'd say please find a community of mothers or parents that have gone through the same thing, interact with them and ask them questions. I'm sure they'd be happy to help.
Thank you so much for that. While you were talking about support group and its availability in some parts of the Western world and its dirt or the lack of it in some other locations, something came to my mind, the power and sometimes the disinformation that comes with social media. Because I've seen a few platforms where people say advice for mothers and they're just putting a lot of junk out there. So how do you then, and this is coming to you, Melissa, how do you then advise parents looking for this critical support, especially in locations where they're not readily available? How do they then balance, and weigh the sort of information? How do they filter it and funnel that through a process where they are sure they're getting the right information, especially in places where there is no readily available platform for them to get this support from?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's something that I'm asked quite often. I know we are definitely in the information age, and I have lots of parents who say, I saw this on Instagram, I saw this on TikTok, is this my child, with this help? I think the best answer to this question is it a reputable source? Reach out to your network, whether that's a support group or your doctor. Is it an educator? Is it a psychologist? Somebody who has the training would be my best my best source of information. Just because you never know what is posted online, and if absolutely, I know there are doctors that post information online. So if you are aware that they are credible, then I would be running with that. But definitely just check out what's in your community. I know here around Sydney, there are advisory groups for autism or specific learning disorder and ADHD. And sometimes it's worth just chatting to some of the other people that other parents at school. They might be aware of services that you may not have come across yet.
Oh, awesome, awesome, awesome. Thank you so much for that. And this is to the both of you, in your experience, like, when you see teenagers or children presenting some of these conditions, what are some of the common challenges that the parents go through? Because, you said they seek help. A lot of us sometimes think that we can do it all. And I realize that I don't know it all and I can't do it all. But when you're like in the situation, you may not see it because you are in that situation. So when you see parents that have children or teenagers going through these situations, what are some of the common symptoms or conditions or challenges that they're going through that you are able to pick up on and say, oh, you need to go seek help yourself? Because some of our listeners might be parents, dealing with these conditions in their children, and they might not have had that look at themselves. They might not have the opportunity to reflect and do a self-check. So if you could just please speak to some of those so that if they see that in themselves, they know that they need to go seek help for themselves as well.
Yeah, definitely. One of the first things that I'm seeing is other parents are often feeling overwhelmed or anxious or find themselves angry at their child all the time. And that's not necessarily a conscious decision. But when we have a conversation about it and I ask, are there more positive interactions with your child or negative interactions with your child? If they can identify that it's negative or they're not sure, then we're going to have a conversation about, well, are you feeling supported? Is there carer burnout happening where it's exhausting being a parent as it is? And when you add any kind of diagnosis on there, that can be quite a challenge. So just having a look at how the parent and child interact, but also how the parent may speak about the child or just their demeanor if they are looking or sounding quite stressed out. That's kind of a prompt for me to have a conversation with them.
Awesome, awesome. And I don't know if you want to just chime in on the conversation. You've got a question to ask Dr. Raina and Dr. Melissa here to be, let's hear from you.
Yeah, I guess in a more broad sense, Dr. Raina, you were talking about myths and such, and I mentioned how a common theme I heard was the one size fits all. I'm curious how, in like maybe more of a teaching setting, how we can apply what we're learning for each child where there's such a diverse range. How can we cater to the specific needs when it can be a lot to have to educate yourself with each child? Are there big broader steps we can take, I guess?
Okay, I mean, really great question, Hannah, because when it comes to learning about neurodiversity on the part of the parents, it would be valuable for a parent to first of all know the exact type of condition that the child has, getting a formal diagnosis. And I think that would really help to streamline the information that the parent is going to need to acquire to make that process of navigating the care for their child a lot easier. So making a formal diagnosis will definitely be useful. But there are some underlying features that kind of harmonize the features that run through neurodiversity. As distinct as they might be, you can find certain similar threads running through all the conditions, including things like, some challenges with communication, some difficulty with, paying attention, maintaining eye contact. And as pediatricians, we generally tend to be the first set of people to encounter some of these symptoms because when they come for their well baby visits, we check their development and try to see, okay, this is what might be going on. Unfortunately, a lot of the neurodiverse conditions cannot be diagnosed in children that are below the age of 2 years. You can suspect, but you generally cannot make a formal diagnosis, strongly until they are somewhere above that age, somewhere in the range of 3. And when they get into the school age years, 5, that's when the features become really, really obvious. Before then, it's like all 3-year-olds are hyperactive, all 3-year-olds bounce off the walls, and so if you begin to, if the parents, if you as the healthcare professional begin to see certain features that might suggest And unfortunately, here in Nigeria, we're not so huge on doing the autism screening at 18 months, with the specific questionnaire that they do, in the West. Here, we don't do it too often, but it's something that we're trying to push and make sure that people get to know so that we can intervene early, such that if we identify certain features that we suspect might be neurodiverse conditions, then we point the parents to right sources of information from reputable websites to healthcare professionals, make sure that they are getting a general overview. And once the formal diagnosis is made, then they can actually begin to read on the specific condition that the child has. And that way, hopefully, they get information that makes the journey a bit easier for them.
Amazing. That is so awesome. Thank you for that depth of, explanation and giving all of these strategies, especially for parents that looking after children living with some of these conditions. And on that note, we'll be bringing on the dynamic duo of Dr. Nee and Dr. O to lead us straight into the Q&A. We see our message boards are flooded with questions, and we're going to tackle them this evening. There are a lot of questions on there, and we need to dive deep into that. Yeah, Dr. Nee, you have the floor.
All righty. Thank you so much. I hope you can hear me. Can you hear me?
Clear. We can hear you clearly.
Well, thank you so much. Thank you all for sitting through this, and thank you to all our speakers. What an amazing session! I've enjoyed every bit of it. Now I can see here almost 26 questions. There's just no way we can sort of answer all of these questions, but I think we should do justice to most of the questions that I hear, and hopefully would get given as much value as possible. Okay, so I will just I'll read the questions, except maybe Anna and Abiola, except you want to help out with that, but let's just put the first question up there. Alrighty.
Yeah, I'm
So
happy to read the question if you want me to, or you want to go.
okay.
I can
Go
read
ahead.
from here. So the first question I highlighted here says, and it's from Joy Ovie, and thanks for putting that question in. It says, how do you control behavioral traits of a child who suddenly comes up with tantrums and they go saying, oh, I'm sad, I don't want to be your friend. And throughout the day, they will not write, and they're age 6. Sometimes they bully or stick to a particular object, and they will not release that willingly or share that object. And then they end by saying that that child acts partly like an autistic child. So how do you control behavioral traits in such a child?
That'll be Melissa.
Melissa, you
I thought that might be
good to answer that one. Yes.
Well, look, it's. I'm going to move away from the word control, the behavioural traits, because it is quite. You can't really control another person. So controlling the behaviour of a child is kind of an unrealistic expectation. And more, we want to have a conversation about how can we teach this child a better way. And that's going to be for a child that is having a tantrum. There's obviously a need that is not being met. They're trying to communicate something to you, and whether that's I don't like what is happening, or I don't want to play with you, or I don't like what it is that you're playing. There might need to be a little bit of skill building about social skills. What's an appropriate way to say that to people? Play skills in terms of how do I play with other people through reciprocity. And in terms of the writing, at around age 6, it's probably not unusual that a child that's 6 years old isn't writing or isn't writing well. But of course, this depends on their level of education so far. It's hard to say exactly what to do because I don't know the child, so it is quite tailored and individualized based on the context of the child. But whereas where you say sticks to a particular object and doesn't release and isn't willing to share, again, there's some learning that can happen there. It might be a fear thing. If I let this go, it will disappear. So creating like a safe space. If this is a favorite toy or something, then it's kept in your backpack and you can access it at any time.
Fantastic. We'll just go to the next one, and then we'll get maybe Dr. Rena to, because we've just got so many questions, okay, to go. Yeah.
So the next question says here, do these things affect motivation to keep striving to achieve? Oh,
sorry,
sorry about that.
Read from the screen. There's this question on the screen.
There's just a comment there.
Okay,
Okay,
well,
I see that.
Yeah,
Oh,
let me do it. Okay,
sorry,
go on. Go.
I have an ASD 4-year-old. I've heard early intervention below age 5 is key. I feel I've only got 1 year of maximize my efforts. What tips or strategies shall I focus on?
Okay, so Ms. Omojesu, so yes, early intervention is very key when it comes to managing children that are on the autism spectrum. And I'm glad, I hope a formal diagnosis has been made, and I'm glad that that is the case, if that is the case. And you are seeing a professional, either a pediatrician, and then you're having this care in conjunction with a clinical psychologist. Of course, we do realize that the challenges or the needs of each child will vary and be individualized. So if your child is having challenges with verbal communication, such that they are having speech delay, their vocabulary is significantly limited, then you do need to see a speech therapist. And speech therapy can be very valuable, can be very useful. If you're having challenges with non-verbal communication, then of course the psychologist can really help with that and really teach you how to begin to maximize whatever communication it is that they are able to give. So don't feel like you have only 1 year to maximize the efforts. I think I'd like you to disabuse your mind from that. Temple Grandin probably didn't say her first words until she was well into maybe her 7th year of life, until she was 7. Of course, that is not the case for everyone, but some children, they are hearing the words are passing through their heads, they are making sense of it, and sometimes just suddenly you'll find out that they just begin to say, the floodgates open and they begin to speak 19 to the dozen. So I don't think that you feel that, oh, if I haven't started my intervention by the time the child is 5, then all is lost. No, it's a lifelong care. It's a lifelong care that we are trying to intervene. Yes, early intervention is absolutely amazing, but don't feel like you've lost all hope is lost. Now, tips or strategies to focus on. I being present, and it does better. I find out that reading to your child is very important if there's an issue with verbal communication. It doesn't have to be anything too elaborate, even if it's just 30 minutes a day, just let it be consistent. Let there be some sort of routine that the child knows that, okay, at this time of the day, I'm going to be getting reading. Help the child engage in physical activities that excite the child, that the child is going to find useful. Create routines that the child will know and help the child to realize that this is what is happening at this point in time. And I think that should. But please, not all is lost, even if you think you have 1 year, you have a lifetime to help that. All the best. I hope that helps.
Okay, I think there was a little glitch in the audio there. I'm not sure whether it was from my end or not. But Dr. Ren, I think there was a little glitch in the audio there. But thank you, sir, for that. I'll just bring up another question, which hopefully, sorry, we're just picking and choosing. I'm just triaging the questions so that we can cover as much ground and get everyone engaged as much as possible. So this is for Dr. Oyekan. It's a child though, but Dr. Oyekan, I'm sure you can speak to this.
Oh, yeah. So how do I manage my hyperactive daughter who goes back to doing the same thing that you say that she should not? Well, look, the fact that your daughter is hyperactive doesn't mean that she has ADHD. and I think that you should get formally assessed first. Children in the early ages of life, actually, in the earlier years, we actually don't make diagnosis of ADHD until the ages of 6. Also the fact that she's hyperactive, I don't know how old she is, doesn't mean that she has ADHD, so she needs to be assessed. But look, if your child keeps doing the same thing that she should not, look, is that normal behavior to start with? Kids sometimes can be, disobedient. But if it is such that it is becoming problematic, then maybe we need to kind of get a psychologist involved in our care. But because a child is disobedient, doesn't mean we have to put her on a pill.
Okay, fantastic. Sorry, just still try the questions. We've got so many questions here. And I just want to pick up the ones that I think are quite topical. All right. Dr. Rena, this is interesting. How come AS is more common these days, eh? It's just more.
Very. But am I clear now? Because I think me complained that there was a challenge in my audio. But am I clear right now?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, it's better.
Okay, great. All right. Janet Oyelami asked how come ASD is more common these days compared to a few years ago? A very great question. It's loaded. I think perhaps so. It's two things. It's either one, we're just becoming more aware that ASD is something that exists, and we're making the diagnosis a bit more frequently, maybe even over-diagnosing sometimes, just to out of an abundance of caution. And then secondly, truly, there might be environmental exposures that might actually be making autism spectrum disease actually more common than it was a few years ago. These are all hypotheses. Nobody, and in the West, unfortunately, I haven't looked at the figures, but the rate at which ASD is diagnosed in the West is definitely more than in the the developing world. And that might be because we are not looking out for it as much. But what I find curious is that a lot of parents who are giving birth abroad now seem to just have that complaint more. To say that, Dr. Rena, I gave birth to my first child. He was probably 3 years old by the time we're moving to the UK. He seemed fine. But this my child that I gave birth to in the UK seems to be coming down with autism. It seems to have features of autism. And this seems to be a thing. So again, it's a theory. Maybe there's something in the environment over there that we don't have here in this part of the world that might just be making us not be as predisposed to it as people who are living in the West. And so these are all the questions really that we don't have answers to and that we're trying to find answers to. But yes, I do believe anecdotally that it's on the increase, and there's some environmental factor that's probably making it so, but we don't know what it is. And research will help us to determine what it might be. We've heard about things like heavy metal exposure, setting environmental exposures, but no strong links have been made to any of these. As it stands now, we still don't know what exactly it is that causes autism spectrum disease, and so it's still something that we have to keep the numbers and keep on looking at what's going on.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for that. I'll still get you to talk about this because this is also maybe a potential, whether it's a myth or, of course, there's some science to this as well about the hereditary nature of some of these conditions. And they tend to run in families sometimes, don't they? Sometimes you see multiple family. I mean, Melissa, you can share some experience with that. I've seen, for example, I've seen families where they've got, a parent that had 2, 3 autistic kids or children with autism in the same, family.
Yeah, definitely. I have clients that I work with where I'm working with 2 out of 3 siblings. And then later on, the parent is also diagnosed with a neurodiverse condition. Alternatively, I have also worked with a set of twins where only one twin received a diagnosis and the other one did not meet criteria. So the medical side of it's probably a bit beyond me, but I do definitely have experience where even though they might be siblings, both with ASD, the presentation can still be completely different. We might have a child who is verbal and their learning is just slightly delayed, whereas the other child might be completely nonverbal and delayed across quite a few developmental milestones.
Yeah, amazing. Dr. Rena?
So this is another very important point in terms of is autism spectrum, is it hereditary? So there's definitely a genetic component to it. Now, the reality is that not every genetic condition is hereditary, such that if a father has it, definitely a child is going to have it. So there's no evidence for that. However, the fact is that when you study identical twins, and if you want to study the idea that a condition is genetic in nature, look at how often it occurs in identical twins. Because identical twins, essentially, they have the same genetic makeup. They're sharing exactly the same genes. And so if a condition seems to occur more frequently in identical twins, then there's evidence that there's a genetic component to it. And it does occur more frequently in identical twins than in non-identical twins, and it tends to occur more in siblings. But that it can be inherited and passed from a parent to a child. No gene, no inherited gene has been identified as being, this gene is the one that a father can pass to their child to say that, oh, definitely this child, since this father has this gene, definitely his children are going to have autism. No, that gene has not been identified, but there is a genetic component to also called autism spectrum disease, but not inherited. I hope that clarifies it.
Yeah, fantastic. Let me just quickly take this one from Lillian. What do you think about stem cell therapy for children with ASD, and is there an age limit for children with ASD to benefit from stem cell therapy? Now, of course, stem cell therapy, for those who do not know this, involves harvesting stem cells. Stem cells are very primitive, early stage blood cells that can differentiate into different types of cells. So they can almost form any kind of cell depending on how you program them. So they are programmable, what we call pluripotential cells that can be programmed into any other type of cell. So they can form neural tissue, for example, they can form a brain tissue. And stem cells have been used over the years for different things. People inject them in the skin and the joints to repair joint tissue. And the idea is that these stem cells may also be able to repair brain tissue. Now, there are only 5 studies of up till now that have been performed in this particular area of stem cell therapy in autism spectrum disease, and most of them have an endpoint of safety. So, in fact, they're in the very, very early stages. The endpoint is just to see how safe they are, and there's not been proven efficacy. But of course, in the lab, you can prove that stem cells can have, they have immunological properties, so potentially they can, improve, function in rat and mice and stuff like that. Whether it translates into reality and whether that would result in any functional improvement is going to be different. So sometimes you may get benefit, but there may be no functional improvement in a child. So the idea that, okay, I get my child to have stem cell therapy and that would change their behavior, or that would make them achieve more milestones, or make them learn faster, it's going to be very difficult to prove. But well, not now, it's not possible, but it's certainly, maybe it's promising. Of course, there are certain limitations to that in terms of the ethics. How will it be done? It's invasive. Is it going to be stem cells from the child? Is it going to be a donor from someone else? All of those issues. And currently it's in clinical trial. So I don't think that any of the Western countries have that established as a routine treatment modality. But of course, in the United States, which is, the US is the frontier for most of these new advances. It's certainly going through trials, and if you want to be part of a clinical trial, you can enroll your child in that clinical trial. Just make sure that you're not coerced, and make sure you're aware of the potential limitations that can occur and the dangers that can occur, because it's also not without risk. That's what I would say about that. Dr. Oyekon, very quickly about this. What are some of the assessment tools for ADHD, and how effective they are? Can we just go online and download? There are a lot of ADHD stuff, and I see a lot of people, they just go online. Some of them are free, some of them you pay 5, 10 bucks. You download a form, you fill it in, you get your diagnosis, and you go around with it. I've got ADHD. You just look for a psychiatrist who can give you a prescription.
Yeah, look, the diagnosis of ADHD is essentially clinical. You have to sit in front of a doctor or a psychologist, or a neurologist or a pediatrician, to get your diagnosis. But that said, a lot of people, these days of TikTok, there's a lot of things out there that people are trying. People have been, there's a lot of ASRS form. And there's the Diva 5.0. And I know in younger kids there's the Corner scale. So there are quite a few things that kind of point to the fact of the likelihood of ADHD. Okay, and it's not until you sit before a specialist, who takes a comprehensive history, that a diagnosis of ADHD can be made. So those assessment tools are only suggestive; they are not definitive.
Fantastic. So those tools are not definitive; they are just suggestive. Melissa and Dr. Renner, another one. Can you share advice to help neurodiverse kids learn academically? There's a trend majority are behind in mainstream school. So it's very practical now.
I think this is a difficult question to answer because it definitely depends on the presentation of the child. For some children, being neurodiverse doesn't necessarily affect their academic performance. It might affect them socially. It might affect their play. It might affect their adaptive functioning. So there would definitely be children who wouldn't struggle learning in a mainstream setting. However, there would be children who might need some additional help. And that's probably a conversation to have with your multi-disc team, and definitely with the school, to see what the challenges are. Is it a difficulty focusing in class? Is it a difficulty, we can't sit still on the floor? Is it difficulty with the actual learning? Like, are we looking at a specific learning disorder? So it really depends on what it is that we're looking at, and what resources there are available as well within the school system.
Okay, hold that, and I'm going to hand another one there for you. Parenting on its own can be hard. What advice do you have for mothers who are neurodiverse and navigating motherhood, especially in the perinatal phase? So we're talking about, maybe the mom with an autistic child and having another one. So you chip in there, and while you're doing that, Dr. Renner will just also think about that as well.
I think it probably goes back to some of those earlier conversations. If you're struggling parenting even a neurotypical child, definitely reach out for help, whether that's just to your GP, your partner, your friends, a psychologist, whoever it might be. But when we add a diagnosis on there, that can be hard just for parents to accept once the diagnosis is given, and then kind of navigating through the behavioral and the social and emotional challenges that might come out of that. My biggest advice is reach out for the support.
Okay, fantastic. And Dr. Reina, you can answer this with all the other ones. Okay. All right. What can you advise parents who've got their child diagnosed with ASD or ADHD, considering the overwhelming feelings that come with information? How do you handle the diagnosis as a parent?
Okay, so let me just answer this question. So handling diagnosis as a parent, yes, the information when it is first of all presented can be quite shocking. because everybody wants a child that is absolutely perfect, without any challenges. The first person that I think one can turn to when it comes to such situation, of course, is one's partner. And I do realize that now they are, of course, single parents, but the person to whom you can actually turn to say, this is the diagnosis that has been made. And while we might not always have someone go with us to the hospital, when we're receiving this diagnosis, it would be helpful to call someone, to just speak and let them know that this is what has been said, so that you get that initial shock off your chest and get a sort of like a shock absorber to have that discussion with. When the diagnosis has been made, I think it's important that parents, attend, forums or webinars or seminars like this, just understand what can be happening. And I also would like for parents to actually just realize that, yes, you probably would have been seeing some symptoms before you would have gone for the formal assessment. But the reality is that all these conditions fall on a spectrum whereby some are mild, some are moderate, and some are more severe. And I think that grading and actually placing the child on the severity of what the condition is will go a long way in positioning your psyche to realize that, okay, this is something that actually I can handle. Getting experiences from parents who have had children, who are managing children with diversity, especially those who are on the more severe spectrum and who have recorded successes, is actually a way of motivating yourself. So please keep yourself motivated in that regard. As far as the educational system is concerned, the educational system is not really tailored to cater to children with neurodiversity in a lot of ways. And some people have likened it to the fact that you are testing a fish on how to climb a tree alongside a monkey who knows how to climb a tree, inside out. And so sometimes I think that's tailored. It really does require an intersectoral collaboration between the education and the healthcare professional, such that they are not working in silos, they're not working in isolation, and whatever reports the school has should be forwarded to the healthcare professional. Whatever reports the healthcare professional has be forwarded to the school, so that the school is aware that the needs of this child need to be tailored to the way in which they view the world. And then, and I think that was Zion's question where she was asking about, okay, so what happens in the perinatal period when she's managing a child? I think the question was already had a child that is neurodiverse, and then in the perinatal period, another child is arriving. That is a very challenging situation because the hormones are everywhere. Help, help, help. Get as much support as you can. Again, this is where there are differences in Nigeria and in the West, and whereby here we can still see people come around to go or move war. But in the West, I mean, it's somewhat isolated. So I'd say that if you have the resources to pay for someone to come around and to help or fly someone over from Nigeria, please do so that they can actually come and relieve you of that burden of caring for the kids just by yourself.
Wow. Well, thank you all for doing this, and Anna and Abiola, thank you so much. It's 3 hours on the dot now since we started, and I think this would be a good note for us to wrap up this session. Um, I would just say maybe each of the speakers should just say something, maybe half a minute each, just to wrap up, and then we'll leave the platform to Anna and Abiola to bring this webinar to a close. So I'll start with you, Melissa.
I hope tonight has been informative and educational. I've loved sharing my experience so far with everybody from all over the world, which is a really weird thing to think about. I hope the biggest takeaway is, having a diagnosis doesn't change who your child is. It's just a different way for you to think about them and to help them learn. And let's build as many skills as we can together and make sure you're looking after yourself so that you're here for the long run.
Amazing. Dr. Eka.
Well, look, it's not all doom and gloom. Okay, there is hope. Regardless of whether you have ADHD or whatever neurodiverse condition that you have, or your son or your ward has, there is hope, and they can still achieve and attain to a lot in life. Early treatment is key. Seek out, specialists early, and educate yourself about what's going on. And yeah, just take one day at a time, and it's all going to be all right.
Amazing. Dr. Rena?
Okay, so I think Dr. Yoko and Dr. Melissa have actually touched on the salient points, and I'll just say that when it comes to neurodiversity, we are not playing it as well. You can just walk through the woods. Sometimes it's actually hard. Sometimes it can be challenging. The stimming, incessant inattention and hyperactivity. We acknowledge that, and I think that halfway getting through that challenge is acknowledging that sometimes it's going to be tough, sometimes it's going to be difficult. But reaching out for help, calling for help when you need it, continuously learning and not learning, and tailoring your interventions and even your own emotions to the requirements of the child will help the journey seem just a little bit easier. And I personally hope that we try to do that, on this webinar.
Fantastic. Well, thank you all for joining. Thank you to all the speakers for agreeing to do this for free and just giving your time, 3 hours of your time. I really appreciate it. I could not provide most of all this on my own, but I thought it would be nice to put this together so that all of the parents were out there. And I've seen some of you who have even sent questions. You've had one-on-one sessions with me, and I see you. And I hope that you were not let down by this, because you're the ones that have made it happen. You're sending your questions to me, has made me put this together. Maybe we'll do this again. Who knows? Maybe we'll do it. I know there are a lot of more questions I can see in the comments. In fact, we have too many questions, but I don't think we can answer all of those questions. But so from my own end here, I want to say thank you so much for being the heroes in the lives of these children. You're the ones, you're the heroes, you're the ones there in the trenches every day in, day out. You have no break, no leave. You're there working hard to make the lives of your children, or the life of the people that God has put in your hands, to make their lives worthwhile. I'm a person of faith, and I'm unashamed about my faith. And I know that there's always a reason for everything. So I know that God's got your back, and no matter how difficult it is sometimes, and when life does not make sense and science cannot explain everything, I know that He's got your back, He's got you okay, and I'm rooting for you, and I'm praying for all of you who are on this school, that you get strength and grace to keep fighting and keep swinging, no matter how hard it may be. And even when you feel like giving up, you'll find the grace and the courage to stand for your kids and to enjoy your life. And I also want to encourage you to please remember that that you are not indispensable. All right, take time to look after yourself. Go for holidays. Find time to rest. Find time to make your own friends. If you're a parent with an autistic child, don't let that define your life. I know I know it will take a lot of time and energy, but still find time to chill, to relax, to enjoy life. All right. I don't think that if you die, they wouldn't continue with their lives. Yes, they will. All right, they will. All right. A lot of people have made that mistake. You're very important to us. Remember that a wounded soldier is a nuisance. It doesn't matter how caring and loving you are. If you're unwell, you cannot look after your unwell child. If you're unwell, you cannot look after your neurodiverse child. So look after yourself. Stay well, stay healthy. Love you so much. Thank you guys it's been a great pleasure having you. So we'll hand over to Abiola and to Anna, and hopefully we'll have another webinar one of these days. Cheers.
Thank you so very much, Dr. Nee. Anna, what an amazing webinar we've just been a part of. It feels to me, because we started in this part of the world on the 31st day of August, now in the first day of September. So this is a webinar that has gone across 2 days for us here. And every second, every minute spent on this webinar has been absolute value to me. I'd like to hear what your thoughts are on what we have just experienced. Like, it's been amazing.
Well, I from the beginning, I was expecting to learn. I was expecting to grow in my knowledge, even though I'm not a parent. There are people in my life with ADHD, with dyslexia, with autism spectrum disorder, and to learn how we can attend to those needs has just been unbelievably valuable. And the key, like the title of this webinar being Unlocking Potential, I really saw how parents can utilize that, how they can unlock the potential of their neurodiverse child. I just thought it was wonderful to hear from the experts and to gain knowledge, and I hope that the audience gained the same.
Awesome, awesome. And part of the closing comments that I really honed in on and just held on to was when Dr. Rainer said that don't think that life has come to an end, especially when your child or someone you're looking after has been diagnosed with this kind of condition. There's hope. That is the key. There's hope and there's help. Don't think that you have to do it alone. And when Dr. Nii was speaking as well, and he spoke about that faith. If you've got faith and you're a faith-based person, God has got you. Don't just think that you have to do this alone. Don't think that it's the end of the world. Look after your own health, because it is when you're well that you can look after your child as well. So those were very key points for me, and I believe that our audience will do well to hold on to those closing remarks. And we want to thank you all for being with us on this journey. It's been a 3-hour-long journey, a little over 3 hours, but we thank you for all your comments, for all the questions, for all your contributions. And when Dr. Nii was closing, he said, yeah, we may do this again. So be on the lookout on neeburere.com. That's Dr. Nii's website, on his social handles, on Instagram, on Facebook, on LinkedIn. If there's going to be another one, we're going to post it there. And as soon as the link comes out, start registering so that we can deepen this conversation and learn more from one another, and maybe even attend to some of the questions we couldn't touch tonight. And I think on this note, because I've had that wonderful pleasure of sharing this platform with Anna, she's been a wonderful co-host. We will be saying goodbye from here.
Yes, thank you so much for your time. Okay, bye-bye.
See ya. Bye.